it say on my end?
Okay.
Stop streaming. Yeah, it says, looks like I'm streaming and recording, so I am opening up here. I'm hoping that everybody can see your stuff. By the way, if anybody in my audience is already watching, just be aware that I'm a total boomer with this. So if you are sending me messages, I will not see them until after the stream. And if you want to send me money, I will thank you afterwards. Though I would honestly prefer, if you did anything, to go and support the Durruti 2 benefit for Raison for Ukraine, which is in link in the description. Though I would honestly prefer,
Okay,
if you
so
did
Anart,
anything,
are you
to
going
go
yet?
and support the.
It looks like I am.
That's awesome. We are very professional streamers.
Yeah, we're so professional. This is wild. Mine's like chugging though. Like here's the link. You can tell me how that looks on your end. I think on my end it looks like it's chugging. So.
Hang on, I have you. This is gonna annoy everyone because it'll go. Oh, yep, I'm seeing this. There's the link to the live stream. Should I open this up? Yeah, I'm gonna open this up, and this will horrify everyone. Hang on. Link will take you to. Yep, yeah, I want to go there. Let's see what we're seeing.
Mine's like chugging though. Like here's the link. You can tell me how that looks on your end. I think on my end it looks like it's chugging. So.
Chugging as in slowly.
Yeah, it looks like it's got like a frame rate of like 1 frame per minute.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting over here too.
Dang, I don't know how to fix that. Well, it's not a hardware problem. Definitely some kind of upload speed. Oh yeah, it's getting really bad connection here.
Wow. I'm sure this is just like the hard-hitting content people need.
100%. I'm sure they're extremely excited about me having streaming difficulties. They're probably sitting here like, oh man, wow, will Daniel ever get us up to like 2 frames per minute? And that really like remains to be seen.
Oh, so I am live. Let me see. Oh, and now I'm just seeing I'm just seeing my thing from the inside. All right. So I'm going to close out of this. It doesn't look like mine's going super slowly, or at least based on my voice, it doesn't seem like that. So it's maybe on your end.
What I'm seeing here is that your panel is coming up gray. So I don't know what is happening. This is pretty bad.
Gray on your stream?
Yeah, I can't see you on mine.
Yep, we've already got someone in the chat, Siri. It's chugging on Anarch's side.
Oh, it's definitely chugging on my side. No doubt about that. Although it's not my CPU. My CPU is only at 30%. It says that the upload speed is just ludicrously low. This is welcome everybody. This is what it looks like to troubleshoot a live stream. It says it's dropping lots of frames, dropping a strong 84% of all frames.
Well,
Dropping frames live stream.
Let's see.
Because of this, program is forced drops in the okay,
I'm gonna move this up here just so that my viewers can see my beautiful face instead of like the forever recording where it's recording itself. You know?
Right. Let's see. Maybe it has something to do with the output. Maybe I need to lower the bit rate or something. Did that fix it?
Let me take a look and see.
It looks like the dropped frames are already plummeting. Looks like they're already getting better. Yep, that was a huge difference. That made a big difference, although definitely still it's a little bit of lag, but it's not bad.
Cool. Very excited. And I got you into my headset now, so I don't think that was causing a problem. Hopefully, the people on my channel can hear both me and you. It should be good. We'll see.
Pretty much the only issue now is that they don't seem to be able to see you very well on the stream. It doesn't even look like you're popping up anymore.
Huh. You know what? Let me check and see something, because maybe it's the...
Oh, that kind of worked. Kind of. Okay, there we go. No, it stopped working immediately.
Oh, oh wow. What did you do?
I don't know. I have no idea how to make it work. I'm just going to look at you on stream, and that seems to keep it working if I do that. I think. Yes, if I look at the Discord window, if I keep it focused, we've got this. Then they can see me. Yes, it's truly phenomenal what I've got going here. This is high tech.
It's fine. People can splice it together later.
Yeah.
The legions of fans with video editing and time that we have.
Oh yeah, I haven't even thought. Can people hear your audio? Wow. Yeah. Can they hear you? Say something for us.
Testing 1 2 3. Sibilance testing 1 2 3.
Okay, what do y'all think? Do we got some
testing.
Yep. Yeah, I can hear you there. I'm listening to it. Nice. Okay, my friend, it does appear as if we have a live stream. This is indeed happening. Okay, now I'm just going to show it to all of the servers and stuff. I'm truly a master of live streaming. That's what I often call myself. And you can see why I call myself that now, having seen having seen my prowess, my live streaming prowess.
Well, what's amazing is that you're still better than me.
I don't know about that. You at least had like a whole platform thought out and everything, but yeah, no, you know what? I'll take it. Yeah. So, hello everybody. Hello all followers. I decided I was going to sit down and have this short talk with my friend here, Brenton Lengel, who is working on a comic book that is about Brenton Durruti and Nestor Makhno, two famous anarchists of history, both theorists and revolutionaries out there really doing things, like actually truly fighting in the revolutionary struggle, not just sitting there writing. But both of them also very interesting theorists of their sort. I mean, obviously Makhno more than Durruti, but the two of them are extremely key figures in the movement. I don't know. You want to like get started? This will probably be pretty unstructured, but you want to start by talking about both of these people?
Yeah, absolutely. Just in case you guys are just meeting me right now, my name is Brenton Lengel. I am a poet, playwright, anarchist, and former Occupy Wall Street activist. And I'm the creator of the Ringo Award-nominated comic series Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, which is actually in your local comic shops now. The third issue should be out very soon. But once I, got famous for doing a book about zombies and fairy tales, what do? Well, you go do a biopic about a famous anarchist. So yeah, I'm the writer-creator also of Durruti, Shadow of the People. This is one of my favorite covers, by the way, because we use his original jail support photo. So yeah, I guess sort of where these two figures kind of came from. I've been obsessed with Durruti since I learned about him back in, I think it was 2010, 2011. If I recall, it was right before Occupy Wall Street. And I was reading George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia. There's a whole video series where I do that chapter by chapter on my channel with my co-host Bobby. Basically I was reading in there, and George Orwell mentions a few times this group called Friends of Durruti. And so I'm like, who the hell is this Durruti guy? And I go and I look him up, and I'm just like, oh, holy shit, this guy's like the coolest freaking guy I've ever heard of. How in the world does no one know about? Oh, right, anarchist. That explains everything. So, at the time I had started writing, I was working as a playwright in Manhattan. I've beat my head against the wall there for 10 years straight. Um, and I was originally working on a play called No Gods, No Kings, which was set in revolutionary Catalonia, like right on like the on the line and centered around a couple of anarchist fighters. But I realized while I was doing that I kept like jumping to Durruti's story, and I was like, no, I can't do that because that's a film. So basically, I went from that to once I was able to start making comics. I'd already written a full film series about Durruti because the play. It felt like I was just rewriting Homage to Catalonia, and I was just like, well, that already exists. So yeah, I adapted Durruti's life, as particularly like the most dramatic points, starting with his incarceration after trying to kill the Spanish king and failing in France, all the way up until his death in 1936. So yeah, I mean, Durruti, if you haven't heard of him before, he started out as sort of a bandit and bank robber, kind of a Robin Hood figure, in Spain in the early 1900s. Then he cut a swath of revolution across 5 countries and 2 continents. And when Spain's military went fascist, he took up the defense of Barcelona and defeated the military, and ushered in the anarchist control of Catalonia and revolutionary Catalonia in general, which is one of the 2 largest and most significant anarchist movements and show of the power of anarchist organizing, that we can always point to when people say anarchy doesn't work, anarchism doesn't work. You just point them straight at revolutionary Catalonia, and they'll just ignore you and say it still doesn't work, but you will have at least put it in that direction. So that's Durruti. And then while I was researching his life, I read a number of books from a bunch of different sources. The primary one is this giant tome from AK Press. This is Durruti and the Spanish Revolution by Abel Paz. Abel Paz being an anarchist, he was about 15, and he wound up like fighting in the revolution after the anarchists were suppressed and the fascists immediately, defeated the Stalinists. He wound up as a political dissident and was actually jailed, I believe, for a time by the Franco regime. But once Franco died, he was able to come back and put out these amazing critical histories, because he's also he's not just an activist and an anarchist, he's also a historian. So there's a number of really wonderful books that AK Press has published in English here. And those became kind of the center of the story. So then, we jump to Nestor Makhno. Makhno, I would assume you'd know him, but in case you haven't, he was, very much like Durruti. Started out as an anarchist radical in his early teens, after his brother was conscripted and sent to fight in Manchuria. He wound up, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about his life, but, he went from carrying out a bloodless expropriation of the great landlord's property within Guliai-Polye, his hometown. And beyond that, what was really incredible about this was he also set up a number of communes based upon the stories that his mother had told him of his Zaporog ancestors, the Zaporizhian Cossacks. So, another great history book to pull from, also from AK Press, is Nestor Makhno, Anarchy's Cossack. And holy, even if you've already listened to the Behind the Bastards deep dive on Makhno, you gotta go into this, because his life is so much cooler, and there's just so much to it that it gets left out, even in something like Robert's deep dives, because Robert Evans, Behind the Bastards, I've been following his career since I guess when he was just working at Cracked, and he did a very great deep dive, but there's a lot he missed and didn't include, or at least just wasn't able to include within the format, which I guess we can get into later on.
I
But,
love
yeah.
the 2 episodes. Those are fantastic. Yeah.
The two, yeah, he does some incredible work. In a weird way, he may actually be responsible for me being an anarchist today, because I started out as a cutting my teeth in the New York underground open mic scene, and there was a friend of mine, a musician, an artist that I really had a lot of respect for, BZ Douglas of the BZ Listening Podcast, which is where you and I met, and he was the one that turned me on to Robert's work from the beginning. And, that was just before I moved in very much an anarchist direction. And, a big part of that was being friends with Beezy and also just following Robert's work, which is, yeah. So Robert, if you're watching this, you bread pilled me like indirectly. So yeah, that's a phenomenal thing. But even if you listen to that, you owe it to yourself to go back and actually read the book, because there is so much stuff that was left out. But I'm kind of happy about it, because maybe after I finish the Durruti series, I will dive in and do a Nestor Makhno series. Which yeah, because I mean some of this stuff is just how do you not write that?
Nestor Makhno's life, I mean, you're turning it into a comic book now, but it was basically a comic book life to begin with. It's almost absurd. You're reading about Makhno's life, and it seems like it's fiction. Mm-hmm. And every time I've ever read about Makhno's life, I'm just blown away. Every new detail I learn, I'm like, what? How is this real? How did this happen?
There's a lot of things. One of the things that I think I have speculated, I'm working on a short film about his life that I'm going to put out. And one of the things that I actually speculated upon was, yeah, he had this amazing ability to get out of just about every incredibly dangerous situation he was within. This after the second time the Bolsheviks betrayed him. He would let himself get encircled just to get the Bolshevik army to move where he wanted it to go, so that he could then break out and go do whatever he happened to be doing at that time. And there were a number of times I noticed that he would be under fire in these somewhat impossible situations, and the people shooting at him had basically stormtrooper aim. So there's two theories on that. One, Russians are really bad at war, which, yeah, maybe. But two, and it could be a combination of this also, I think really a lot of the rank and file Red Army soldiers just didn't want to kill him, because they had fought side by side for so long, and it was known that if you were captured by Makhno, as long as you were a normal soldier, he just let you go. Disarm you or give you the option to join the Black Army. But you got to think, you're a Russian soldier at that time. You've been conscripted, you've been sent down here, and now they're telling you have to kill the guys who fought side by side and in fact saved Moscow from the White Army and defeated the White Army decisively.
Right.
So, I just wonder, is that just Makhno's genius? Is that just luck, or is that an unwillingness on the part of the Russian proletariat to carry out their orders and liquidate the anarchists?
It's hard to say. I mean, it's clearly he's not perfect at avoiding being shot. I mean, he got shot numerous times by the White Army.
Yeah. Well, by the White Army and the Red Army.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit in Anarchy's Cossack where they're like, and yeah, he sustained 6 gunshot wounds, but none of them were serious.
Right.
And then a little while later, they're like, oh yeah, here's his 11th gunshot.
It's ridiculous. Like the story that they tell on Behind the Bastards, where there's that sort of finishing charge against the White Army, and he gets shot what was it, 3-6 times, something like that. And then he kept on going. He fought till the bitter end, and just, yeah. I mean, okay, so sorry, not for the people who are watching. there is a decisive conflict between the Black Army there in Ukraine and the White Army, who is it's a coalition army of a bunch of imperial powers, of people that really just want to see both Ukraine and Russia fail and capitalism take over instead of the projects that were being established in both of those countries. And
they were also monarchists, czarists.
Yeah. There was a significant monarchist factions there that wanted to restore the czardom in Russia and to put back in place, traditional structures there in Ukraine as well. And there is this sort of decisive battle. I won't get into how, there's all these protracted conflicts and all, but there's this decisive battle that ends up being one of the reasons the White Army loses in this conflict. And at the decisive thing that takes place is that Makhno mounts up and with a saber charges the back lines of the enemy army. And it's so disruptive to them that even people in the White Army report that the moment they saw him coming through with a saber, like chopping up people from the back lines, they knew they had lost the conflict. And that's just shocking. Once again, it's like a comic book already. His life is already just this ridiculous story.
Yeah. Well, that whole thing. It was like a freaking Helm's Deep moment. It really was.
Yes.
With Makhno coming in, Helm's Deep with sabers.
Right.
One of the cooler things I don't believe this was mentioned in the Behind the Bastards episode, but there's this whole bit where during that battle, the White Army soldiers, particularly the brass, when they're running from the anarchists, they said that the fields of the town of Perignovka had this strange crop of golden epaulets. So basically, the soldiers are there, they're getting, they're getting hit with this cavalry charge, and the anarchists are throwing freaking grenades at them, and then coming back in with sabers, and they're just tearing their epaulets off, throwing them and running.
Right.
What's interesting about that one too is it wasn't just the defeat there that kind of cemented the end of the White Army, because a large portion of the White Army was within 200 kilometers of Moscow. Lenin and Trotsky and stuff, they're in there getting ready to freaking flee to Finland, kind of congratulating themselves. Well, we made it longer than the Paris Commune. And then Makhno wound up. He basically took another segment of the White Army and continually attacked them and retreated, which is called trading space for time. So he was inflicting casualties on the White Army, but constantly giving ground for over 600 kilometers until they, chased them to Perignovka. At which point the Whites had him trapped. And he was basically like, okay, this is exactly what I've been waiting for. This is where we do our final stand. And not only it was amazing that he just destroyed that one army. But here was the thing, because he had stretched there so thin, every bit of the White Army's logistics supply was massively underguarded. And so with Makhno's abilities, took his remaining 7,000 troops, split them into three factions, and basically hit the Whites everywhere that where they were mostly undefended, because everybody thought that the armies in the front, the Red Army wasn't going to make it past them and hit their supply lines, and they thought for sure they're going to squash this anarchist rabble, and instead he basically took out their lifeline. It's kind of stamping on an army's lungs. So
it's brutal. But my question,
the White Army, when the generals are sitting there arguing with each other, who's going to be the first into Moscow and have that glory, suddenly they're like, oh shit, we have to retreat. And they wound up going all the way back to their immediate power base, and literally, I think it was Taganrog, the anarchists were at the gates of their their major regional headquarters. And that was halfway through the war.
So my question is, because from what I understand, Makhno was never formally trained in strategy.
Yep, correct.
He it was just intuitive, like he just figured out a modern guerrilla warfare and created tachankas and all that shit, like what? Or is it just because perhaps he had some like cultural knowledge from being a Cossack? Is that like, is it what's going on with that?
I mean, so what I say in Durruti number 2, just so folks, I have adapted his life into part of Durruti because, I'm writing Durruti, and one of the cooler things about his story is that there's these weird, like, synchronicities with comics. One of them, for instance, being that Buenaventura Durruti had a number of anarchist groups, and one of them was known as Los Justicieros, which roughly translates to the Avengers, which means Buenaventura Durruti, as he predates Marvel Comics, he's quite literally the first Avenger.
There you go.
Yeah, so
love it.
So I'm reading about that. I'm like, okay, I got to play this up, and from there, like when I found out about his meeting with Nestor Makhno, and I found out who Makhno was, I was like, wait, he had a crossover, like freaking real life comic book style crossover with a literal winter soldier, because Makhno fought in Russia and Ukraine in winter in like -4 degrees.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got the first Avenger teaming up with the Winter Soldier, and I'm just like, okay, all right, this is a story that I was meant to tell. Anyway, you were asking about like Makhno, like how much of it was his.
Yeah, where did he gain? How did he have this sort of knowledge? Was he some kind of savant about strategy, or was there perhaps some sort of source that he might have gained some of this know-how from? What do you think?
I mean, part of it would have been he was raised on stories of his Cossack ancestors.
Right.
If people don't know who the Zaporizhian Cossacks were, like they were originally escaped serfs that built a community like on the windswept steppe. And they defended and lived free and proud, by the power of the horse and saber. And in fact, like if you look at a lot of modern anarchist ways of organizing, the General Assembly in particular, like that's how the Cossacks, organized their society. They were also, they lived in total equality between genders, and like. And every single person, within the Cossack society could speak, and they had an equal vote and equal say in everything that went on. So, Makhno was told about that growing up, and also how, they, for 200 years, the Zaporizhian Cossacks defended themselves against multiple impossibly powerful enemies on every side and managed to remain free and proud. That is until the old order came crashing down around them again in the form of the jeweled boot heel of Catherine the Great. So, you had essentially escaped slaves building their own, horse-based society, and then getting re-enslaved. And then, when serfdom was abolished, Makhno was only one generation away from that. So, yeah. So his mother, for instance, like had been a serf. His father had been a serf. He was born after the end of it, but as you guys know, if you've seen Find the Bastards, they were free in name only because their land didn't produce enough food to feed a family of I think 5 boys and at least 3 girls, Nestor being the youngest. So like right after Nestor was born, his father had to go like beg his former owner to go back to work for him so that he could keep the family from starving. And the incredibly tragic thing about that is even after doing something like that, incredibly humiliating, it didn't really even count for anything because he died, when Nestor was only 11 months old. So, Nestor never knew his father. I feel like definitely within those stories, he definitely learned anarchist or anarchistic organizing principles, and most likely learned a whole bunch of like just what could work militarily based upon this oral history. So I think that was part of it. I also think that like Makhno, in a way, there's like no one who could have done what he did but Makhno. not because a person wouldn't be capable of doing that, but just the very particular circumstances of Makhno's life lined up in just this sort of perfect way that he was able to, bring his genius to bear in a number of really incredible situations. So yeah, I think Makhno is probably. So this is not in the Behind the Bastards thing, and it's a shame, or at least I may have forgotten it, but it's a shame that it didn't make it in, because so Makhno, when he was first imprisoned, in his late teens, he was sentenced. They'd done some revolutionary activity. I think they carried out some assassinations, and so he was, he was captured with a number of other anarchists and sent to prison. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison and also death by hanging. And he was in there with a number of other anarchists, including some older ones, and this other comrade of his, Igor Bondarenko, who was sentenced as part of the thing, said, look, Nestor, I will die here, but you will live, and the revolution will set you free. And when it does, you must raise the black flag of anarchy and put an end to the social disorder that is plaguing our people. And then when Makhno and the other anarchists and other prisoners there kind of pushed back on this, and they were like, Bondarenko, what are you talking about? Makhno, he's small. He's not particularly strong. He's not some sort of genius. What do you mean he's gonna, he's gonna be the one to raise the black flag of anarchy? And Igor responded that it was not great strength or great genius. What was needed was unfailing faith and dedication to the cause of liberty. That and that alone is what was needed. And he saw that Makhno did not shrink before their torturers, because they're in prison, in Ukraine in the early 1900s. They're getting tortured on a daily basis. It's a very brutal society, and Makhno's just taking it, and he's not wincing. He's not being broken by the people that are wreaking this awful physical violence on his body, and that indicated to Igor that he had the mettle to actually become this person. And so every single thing that Igor said would happened. And as he was being led away to be executed, he's saying the same thing to Makhno. He's like, I'm gonna die here, I'm gonna die today, you are going to live and you will regain your freedom. And the revolution came along, and after 9 years in that prison, Makhno was set free. And so when he returned to his his hometown of Gulyai Polye, he was like the man who had returned from death.
Right.
He was 27, maybe 29 years old at this point. And the fact that, you've already gone through that, when the Russian Revolution hits and the social breakdown starts to happen, not only does Makhno become an obvious center of gravity because he's been set apart from the other revolutionaries, but he's completely fearless, because obviously, he's what could happen to you after that, and so he wound up becoming this really incredible leader, and then I think it was just a combination of his background, also his military style, because we give Makhno a lot of the credit on this, but it really wasn't just Makhno. In their communes, they had the General Assembly, and in military matters, they had the War Council, and every single unit was represented in the War Council, and they all had, an equal vote into what they were going to do. So it wasn't simply that Makhno was a genius, and he definitely was, but it was also that he had the minds of everyone else around him working to pull off this collective action that, which I don't think would be possible for one human mind, no matter how brilliant. But the fact that you've got all of these people together, it's just I think that evolution in a lot of ways is based upon the principle of synergy. And I think in a lot of ways that anarchist, especially anarchist democracy, is applying the principles of synergy to politics and to war. And as we've seen with Makhno and with Durruti, this really works because, just like with swarm intelligence that we have today, a large group of people where everyone is respected and everyone is listened to can contribute to a collective work in a way that, a bunch of people commanded by just a few elites simply can't.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's actually one of the things I would like to see people emphasize more, talk about more in Ukraine is what were their organizational forms? We spend a lot of time talking about the war, talking about conflict, and we spend a lot of time perhaps in almost something kind of like a great man worship for Makhno, who is an exceptional human being, but I would like to see more historical work that is done just on how did the places that had been liberated organize themselves? How did they make decisions? How did they interface with the I don't know if you'd want to call it an army, but the federation of militias and so on, and
I mean, are you talking Spain or Ukraine?
Ukraine.
I mean, the Black Army was an army. It was 100,000 strong peasant army at times. It fluctuated between 2 to 5,000 all the way up to like over 100,000. I think at their absolute strongest it was like when they had 80,000 people, and so it was like 30,000 on the front line doing the fighting, and then 80,000 who were able to like come in and either do logistics work or swap out when someone on the front line had died, and get their weapons. Because if there's one story from anarchists, and one big lesson is that we are always finding ourselves like at a dearth of weapons, and that has been like a major problem in just about every conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would like to see more more analysis of those general assemblies, right? Of those places where they were making more, I don't know what you might say, mundane decisions, the decisions about how to distribute things and, what kinds of, rules are they all going to follow together? If there was people who were doing antisocial actions, how'd they deal with that? Like, what did they do? Did they have a system of like justice councils, or like, how did they approach these sorts of like mundane daily problems? That's something we actually know for the CNTFAI in Spain. Like, we have a ridiculous amount of information about that kind of stuff. Like, oh, yeah. God, they've just deep dived into every tiny minutia of what's happened in Spain. But I've not seen something comparable for the Free Territories of Ukraine.
Yeah, well, there is some in it. So one of the, I guess, one of the things that actually Makhno said to Durruti, and again, he was trying to instill as much, as he could on Durruti, because like in the meeting that I wrote for Durruti's Shadow of the People #2, this takes place in Vincennes, where Makhno, he's in his 40s at this point. Durruti is at this clandestine meeting between him, Durruti Escasso, and a guy by the name of Gregorio Jover, who in my series I have combined him with Oliver. Oliver being, because Oliver is like the third member of Durruti's band, but at this point they hadn't linked up, so just smashed those two together as a character. Though, also, in the second issue of Durruti, if you look at the... Makhno gives them like some... they give them forged passports to get back into Spain. And if you look, because each of the passports has a false name on there. And I used like the actual aliases that they had used for this. But if you look on Oliver's, the name on it is Gregorio Jover. Which is just like a nice little flourish. I'm happy about
just a small homage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm a big fan of that, like with my work. Just I love the 6-person jokes, and there's stuff in the comics that like only I am going to get. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, but so the thing is that what Makhno said specifically was that the key to their strength was that everyone worked. Like the reason that they did not wind up collapsing into more authoritarian models where an overclass of officers or owners or just big grand powerful elites didn't it was because everybody had to do like all the work together and they all shared it, and that was how they managed to not have a ruling class emerge. What I find really interesting about it is the fact that in Makhno's communes, like the first ones that he set up, and they had problems. A lot of them will be ones that anarchist organizers will be familiar with, like if you read the biography about it. But what was really incredible about that was oftentimes in civil wars, especially like massive class conflict, it gets messy and bloody very quickly. People who have power, there's just some like reptile part of our brain that once you've got power, you don't want to give it up. And oftentimes this leads to huge tragic consequences. That did not happen in the communes that Makhno set up. And what was really incredible was that in these communes, like they gave the wealthy people a choice, rather than just lining them up and executing them as the Bolsheviks would have and did. They essentially were like, look, we are collectivizing this property that you used to own. You can go do what you want, or if you want to, you can join us and for an equal share in everything that the community does. And a number of them accepted that, and many came around to like view things like from Makhno's point of view, because as it turns out, having a bunch of money and power isolates you and drives you crazy and makes you miserable. So it is the physical act of laboring together that made like these particular organizations, first civilian then military, as successful as they were. Because as a human, when you are a part of a community working together on a project that is bigger than yourself, and you're not being exploited, even no matter how difficult things may get, the people around you are feeling it just as much as you have. Turns out that's just a way more fulfilling way to live than to be a billionaire.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting. Something very similar happened with the C&T FAI in the Spanish countrysides. In both occasions, well, I mean, no, I haven't read about the Ukraine in this practical sense that we're discussing here, but in the Spanish countrysides, it was mixed. You had some people who, just as you said, were just kind of like, you know what? Yeah, I'll do that. I'm down. I'll become a worker alongside everybody else. We'll own this together. We'll all benefit from the fruits of our labor and so on. And then you had some who just left and fled, like they literally just fled the country. And those people often become like the reactionary elements. They side with enemy armies and so on. I'm sure many of them went to side with Franco.
Oh, yeah.
And then you had some people who stuck around, but they were just pissed about it. And they were constantly like trying to convince the collectives out in the countrysides to uncollectivize and that this wasn't working. And so they actually had to deal with that aspect as well, which was kind of an interesting part of it. But that didn't end up being, just like you're describing in Ukraine, that was not the decisive element that led to the dissolution of these projects, which is what authoritarians always claim, is that sort of like bottom up democratic element is the failure point for this anarchist or libertarian socialist method. But in practice, we find that no, that really is not a failure point. Like, usually the people who are going to take place in your council structures are not going to be your infiltrators. Your infiltrators are going to be doing things in a much more traditional way. They're going to be spying, they're going to be doing assassination campaigns, they're going to be feeding information to the enemy, but they know that if they are a spy, why would you reveal yourself to be an enemy in the middle of the collective, the General Assembly or whatever? So in general, you don't find that that is the failure point. And in fact, it is those General Assemblies, it is those places where everybody can come together and make decisions together that hold everything together. Quite the opposite of being a place where everything comes unraveled. That's what creates that cohesive social fabric.
Absolutely. Now, what's very interesting is, so if you guys have followed my work for a while, I've been accused of being a method writer, in that, like method actors will go and try to live a role, like, Daniel Day-Lewis going, before he did The Crucible, he was like on set building houses and stuff. Usually when I write something, I try my best to get as close to living that as possible before I do my creative work. Because I feel that's very, very important. There's a difference between understanding something on a intellectual or I guess hypothetical level, and then actually like living the reality of it. It's one of the reasons. It wasn't the reason I got involved with Occupy Wall Street. I got involved with Occupy Wall Street because I believed in the movement and what we were standing for, what we were trying to accomplish. But by doing that, I got to take part in a lot of general assemblies. OWS, it's been somewhat forgotten, but that was absolutely an anarchist movement. I mean, Mark Bray went through, and I think it's like 73 to 75% of occupiers identified as some sort of anarchist or left libertarian. So by living that with Occupy, and then not simply being like how the park functioned, because there were a lot of massive lies about the way things were going on in the park. For instance, the NYPD used as an excuse to attack the idea that they needed to clean the park. This was ridiculous. The park was clean. We had an entire sanitation working group specifically because we knew that if we didn't, they would do exactly what they did. I had actually wound up finishing I had just done a fundraiser for the sanitation working group, at the Yippee Museum in Lower Manhattan. And the very next day, I woke up and my wife is like, "Oh, Brent, you're going to be mad about this." And I'm like, "What happened?" So I've even seen other activists will adopt the sort of mythology that Occupy couldn't function and fell apart due to it being decentralized and winter coming in.
Nonsense.
That is 1000% not what happened. What happened was the NYPD originally declared they were going to clear the park, and when the park, when they got together to try to clear the park, 2,000 people came down and stood shoulder to shoulder to oppose them, and they backed down. It's one of the only times this happens with activist groups, is you get the freaking boots on the ground and you get those people ready to, take on the police, and the police will back down. So then shortly thereafter, what happened was it was a raid in the middle of the night, unannounced. Bloomberg called the head of the New York Times and made sure, got their assurance they would take his side in this clearing. I mean, and he sent his freaking stormtroopers in to pull my friends out of their beds, beat them, and they intimidated journalists on the ground, arrested a number of them, kept them away, and they even deployed a helicopter to prevent coverage of the raid, from the air. Afterwards, the NYPD's footage of that got leaked, but it was leaked after the movement was already destroyed, and so people were just going with the the narrative that was being pushed from absolutely left, right, and center, every media organization in the country, that, we just couldn't function and no one knew what our demands were. By the way, just on that, and I did, like 10 years ago, I confronted a reporter on this because he was doing the same thing. Like, oh, what were Occupy's demands? I'm like, okay, 1 month in, the General Assembly approved and published the Declaration of the Occupation of Zuccotti Park, where we put out like a 17-point plan of demands, and they just ignored it and kept going like, what are your demands? What are your demands?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. I don't mean to get like completely off the thing, but like my point being is that if you want to learn how anarchistic principles function in real life, you got to go live it. You've got to do it. You like Rudolf Rocker, I think Durruti or Scasso paraphrased him by saying, we make the road by walking it. And in a lot of ways, like that's what Makhno did. Like you talk about like, how did he come up with the Tachanka? Well, he was faced with an army of 700 professional soldiers, most of them Austro-Germans. He had 30 men and the population of this one village. And these guys were getting ready. They were encamped, and the next day they were going to go in and they were going to capture and execute Makhno and probably kill close to everyone in that town for harboring Makhno, because at this point, he's basically Robin Hood. And so what has he got? He's got 30 fighters. He's got some peasants who aren't fighters. And he has a horse cart, a Maxim gun, a heavy machine gun, and a Lewis gun, which is a light machine gun. So he takes the Maxim gun, puts it on a horse cart. Very natural thing to do. He takes up the Lewis gun himself, gets on his horse, and they flank the encamped enemy from both sides. And the combination of surprise and those automatic weapons being used in a way that automatic weapons had never been used at before. Normally you would like hunker down and, shoot from a position, but this, it's being used in a mobile way where you can just bring it in and, unload on them, sent this 700 army in like full retreat by, like 30 people, 35 people, something like that. And then of course, after the officers ran first, followed by the enlisted, and those that could, like, they dispersed, they fled into the woods, and the inhabitants of that village followed them with frickin' torches and pickaxes. So they either ran or were defeated. But I mean, so in Durruti's Shadow of the People #2, when I have this meeting, between Buenaventura Durruti and Makhno, Durruti's sitting there, like, looking at a picture of him with his Tachanka. And he's just like, Makhno says, Durruti says to Makhno, like, referencing the Tachanka, he's like, you invented it. And Makhno is like, well, I'd say necessity invented it. We anarchists, have strong hearts, but very little else. And so we must learn to improvise. So, yeah, I mean, I guess necessity is the mother of invention.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but by living that life, by doing what he did in the way that he did it, like that's what. One of the things that this is in the comic, and it's also like something Makhno actually said, was that he said, like, don't let people who think anarchism is a philosophy closed to life destroy it. Anarchists are neither sectarian nor dogmatic. We do not have a predetermined worldview. Rather, ours is a force which expresses itself within the march of history. We are the force that drives it forward. So, Makhno as a theorist, was a very kinesthetic theorist, in much the way that, Rudolf Rocker was and Durruti was.
Yeah, absolutely. Rudolf Rocker, probably my favorite theorist, I'd say. I mean, Malatesta is in the running as well, but I think Rocker has the most beautiful, eloquent theory that I've ever read. But we've talked a lot about Makhno. Durruti is the one that gets a lot of attention as well. But interestingly, I think that one of the differences is with the CNT FAI, it's really the entirety of the Spanish anarchist movement that seems to be more remembered. Whereas in Ukraine, it's like for some reason everything focuses around Makhno instead of that mass character. Whereas in Spain, our cultural memory of the Spanish Revolution is that mass character, and the Mujeres Libres and like all of these different factions that were just all truly, everybody was killing it. Like Durruti was fantastic, but like Durruti was just one person. Like I think one of the, Makhno can be said to have gotten down there on the ground and began agitating and really kind of like acted as a catalyst. But Durruti was not the catalyst of the Spanish Revolution. He was just somebody who stepped in to do some necessary work for which he was valorized. And I think that's why a lot of people look at the Spanish Revolution as something really, really important to try to maybe not exactly emulate. It was very different conditions, but at least to learn some very important lessons, not just what not to do, but what also to do. Right. Mm-hmm. And
yeah.
For me, the CNTFAI was super important for my growth as a radical, to learn that we had that scale of success and that it had stuck for several years, and that it literally took like 3 nations colluding together to sabotage and destroy what the anarchists had built in Spain.
Yeah, no, and it's like the same thing with, honestly, the same thing with Ukraine. I think part of the reason that there's so much focus on Makhno as a singular figure is just his story is so freaking nuts. Like, yeah, there's a moment. This feels to me like if you took a Robin Hood movie and a D&D campaign and like freaking. Well, I'll tell you what the other part that's fused with after I explain what happened. So this is during the Austro-German invasion of Ukraine, so it's really before the whites and the reds are slugging it out. Makhno is essentially living like a Robin Hood kind of bandit in the forests of the steppe. And so like they attack this unit, like it's basically like a small unit of Austro-German soldiers, and they kill them. And after they go through it, they find this letter on like the commander, and the letter was inviting the commander to this like freaking fancy soiree at the home of a wealthy collaborator that was within the area. So Makhno and his best guy, they take their uniforms, put them on, and show up at this party as these guys. And so they get welcomed in. There's all like the occupying brass along with like the rich people who are collaborating with them. And supposedly during the dinner, like they go up to toast like, oh, and may you very soon capture the bandit Makhno. At which point Makhno reveals himself and throws a freaking bomb on the table.
Oh my god.
Like he is Bugs Bunny.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, and I know that is true, and you know how I know that's true? Anyone making something up would not make that up.
No, for real though. That's the thing about Makhno's life. Every time I've researched him, I'm like, okay, this is too bizarre for fiction. We would call it contrived if it were fiction, right? Yeah. We would say like, oh no, that's unrealistic. Like his life was filled with that.
As an artist, like, if I was coming up with Makhno whole cloth, I would never write anything like that. No. And I think at the same time, like, as a propagandist, if you're trying to, if you're trying to move people one way or another, you don't tell that story because, immediately the response is, really? So I really think that's one of the reasons like why I'm pretty certain a lot of these stories about him are true, and those that are exaggerated are maybe far less exaggerated than they seem. But Yeah. So Durruti and the Spanish anarchists, I mean, what was really interesting about Durruti was that like one of the other series that I'm working on right now is Los Errantes, and I'm also writing a film, or I'm sorry, I've written a film, and we're in the funding process of it. We've actually gotten about half of what we need with Enon Films. These are the folks I've been working with. They optioned the Durruti script, and then they commissioned me to write this other film. This one's called Wanderer's Feast. And like Durruti, what was incredible about him was, he started at 17 joining the metalworkers union. His parents had wanted him to be like an intellectual, and he was like, no, I want to be a worker like my dad. So eventually they apprenticed him to a radical socialist blacksmith named Melchor Martinez. And Melkor said, like, oh, okay, I'll teach your son to be a master blacksmith and mechanic, but like, I'm also going to teach him to be a socialist. And they were all like, yeah, that's fine, because that was what the family was all about anyway. Um, so then, like, at 17, Durruti, after he's joined the Metal Workers Union, and he's striking in solidarity with the powerful and like Asturian miners. And in 1917, like the Asturian miners, so just a little after, I guess he's like 18 or 19 at this point, um, the king gives the order to machine gun the Asturians, to kill as many of them as they need to kill to get them back to work. And so shortly thereafter, Durruti receives his draft notice. And so, like, he basically, the same government he saw just use their military to kill his friends is like, hey, you have to join this military now. And so Durruti famously said, the king will have one less soldier and one more revolutionary. And he made good on that. So, there's a period where he's going back and forth across the border between France and Spain, doing a lot of radical organizing, expropriations, and then he has this whole period where he's going from country to country. I mean, Spain, France, Cuba, Mexico, Argentina. And like, there's just these incredible things that happened while he was there. The first Wanderer's Feast comic is about when he was trying to organize workers on a sugar plantation in Cuba. And it's, straight up like a real story about him where, like, he's sitting there trying to organize them. He gets them to strike. The boss comes out basically and berates the workers about, he knows that they've come under the sway of certain individuals that they definitely should not be listening to. And then they pulled, and obviously Durruti and Ascaso, they're sitting there like, uh-oh, is this guy on to us? And he just brings out like three random guys, and they've been beaten like half to death. And he's like, okay, does anybody else want to complain? Now get back to work. The money you've wasted is going to be deducted from your pay. So Durruti, Ascaso, and Hover, when the sun comes up, this guy has been brutally killed with cane knives, and his car has been stolen. And that's Durruti and them all. They left things calling themselves Los Errantes, which is the Wanderers. The other film that I'm writing about, for instance, it's based on a real incident in Durruti's life, about where he like shows up in Tampico, Mexico, and he's arranged to have a meeting with this union activist from the CGT. And Durruti's like, okay, this is after he's stolen $500,000 from the Bank of Spain and knocked over quite a few others. And the guy's like, the meeting is going to be held at this like really ritzy, like the finest restaurant in all Tampico. And the organizer's kind of like, I don't know, like I want, like, I feel like it's not right for me to go here to this place that's like in the upper, echelons of luxury. I'm an anarchist, I'm a revolutionary, but also like I really want to eat there. So he goes and he finds Durruti, and Durruti's there in the restaurant like under an assumed name, and he's just like almost like the center of everything. Like everybody thinks he's a wealthy miner, like a mine owner from Peru. And like he's just sitting there and he's like, and the guy's like, he's like, what are you doing here? And Durruti's like, I'm undercover. Obviously, like the cops are tearing through the slums right now trying to find me. I'm just hiding in plain sight here. And the cool thing about that story is, the guy is an educator, and he wanted to set up a fairer school. So Durruti asked him at one point in the meeting, he's like, what would you do if you had 100,000 pesos? And the guy's like, I don't know. If I had 100,000 pesos, I'd start my school. But that's a dream, Durruti. And Durruti's like, okay. And they have their dinner. They go their separate ways. And about a week later, this guy gets a package in the mail. It's 100,000 pesos. Durruti had robbed a textile plant to get the money to give to this guy.
Love
to build
it.
his school.
Love it. Yeah, the thing is that kind of one of the tragedies about reading these old stories is that expropriation was an extremely common way to fund the movement back then. But that's because legit, it was just easier to knock over a bank. It was just easier to do some wild stuff and get away with it. Like these days, that's not literally impossible, but they've made it very, very difficult, very, very difficult, to the degree where you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot if that's the method you choose. And it really kind of makes things difficult. Because we have to have very different methods than they did.
Yeah. I 100% agree.
Yeah.
I mean, you've also got to understand, like, the context that Durruti and Makhno lived in is something that, like, I don't think anyone in the first world can even imagine today. Makhno, he and his fellow, they were subjected to daily beatings, by their so-called betters who had just one generation owned. So, you think, if you're an American, think about, like, the Jim Crow South. Like immediately after, the fall of the Confederacy, once the Union Army leaves, you got to think, how brutal is that society going to be? Because it was certainly brutal before that, and nothing's changed at this point other than the legal designation. But a lot of the class relationships were still there. In Durruti's time, like, employers would do this thing. They would create these what was called yellow unions, which was a union that they controlled that you were forced to join if you went to work for them. So that was your union, so that the CNT-FI, wouldn't come in and organize with you.
Right.
The thing about these unions was also the owners hired what was called pistolerismos. These essentially are assassins. They're hired to be in the union and pretend to be a worker. And what they're supposed to do is listen for any like talk of striking or rebellion or any kind of organizing. And their job is, when they hear that, to take that guy out back and shoot him in the head. Like, there's a bunch of awful, abusive practices, that go on, even stuff like, Killer Coke, like where Coca-Cola hired, basically fascists to murder union leaders in Nicaragua. But like, even that really does not touch on just how brutal Spanish and Ukrainian society was at that point in history. People have said to me like stuff like, "Oh, is there going to be a revolution soon?" And I'm like, "No, not likely," or a civil war, And they're like, "Well, why not?" And I'm like, "Well, because like in Spain, the landowners literally hunted people." Like the sons of them, they called it, I think this was after the war broke out, but like just to see like the level of dehumanization and class antagonism that was going on in Spain at the time. Like, like these people would basically grab these peasants, and they called this reforma agraria, which was, mockingly called land reform, where they would like chase this freaking peasant down on horseback, murder him, and dump him in a hole and be like, okay, there's that little patch of earth you always wanted. So like, a lot of the time people from our time look back at the actions of activists and, people, militants like Durruti and like Makhno, And they either think one of two things. They either think, okay, that's the way you be an activist, or they think like, this doesn't make any sense. These people must be insane. And neither is correct. What you just have to understand is that they were products of their time and products of their society that put them in this position to begin with, and kind of made extreme methods like that, both effective and unfortunately sometimes necessary. But like, if you want to see like modern expropriation, I would say go watch The Take by Naomi Klein about the recovered factories movement in Argentina, where much more humane modern tactics are being used, and there's even an element of putting pressure on the government to do this. But like the point being is that don't, if you're a revolutionary right now, don't be thinking, what did the revolutionaries in the past do? How do I do exactly that? You really want to take into account the entire history of, anarchist movements. And that includes people like Durruti, and also like people like frickin' Tolstoy,
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the thing is that I absolutely agree with what you said about the tactics that they are using being responses to their conditions. I think that's a really important thing for people to understand. Those tactics wouldn't work the same way in the modern era. And the only way that they would even become prevalent again is if the deprivation of modern people becomes so deep that people are willing to do drastic things in order to overthrow the system once again. I'm sad to say we appear to be trending in that direction. Things are getting worse and worse. In fact, I got to say, I think inflation is so wildly out of control right now that within maybe the next just few years, we're going to have so many people that are living in just abject poverty that very extreme things are probably about to start happening. Furthermore, we can see that we've got another financial bubble built up, and things are rapidly getting worse on that front, particularly with the housing crisis. Wow, that sounds super familiar, huh, friend from Occupy? But but it looks like that if that busts again, we have this extreme high inflation, the housing bubble busts again. Who knows what the hell is going to happen? I mean, things might get real spicy. But I think that we're in different conditions where we need to be building in a different sense. Another thing I'd like to emphasize, and I think this doesn't get emphasized enough, is in the Spanish Civil War. And this is really a tendency. I think this is an erroneous tendency on the part of modern revolutionaries. We look at the rupture and we just say, what was everything that was being done on the day of the rupture, or a week before, or a month before? And then we think that we've got the whole story. That is not the whole story. These huge revolutionary junctures had decades of building up beforehand, right? There was all of these necessary conditions that had to be built up by revolutionaries and by organizers, by radicals of all sorts, well before it ever happened. And it began with things that seem really mundane and boring, like just educating people, like just organizing some unions, like doing a little bit of collective bargaining. And you grow this consciousness well before your rupture ever takes place. The rupture is a historical condition, which you just end up having to respond to. You have to create power for the people. You have to create these horizontal structures well before the rupture comes. Because if you don't have them by the time the rupture comes, you ain't going to be doing any CNTFAI. You ain't going to be doing any free territories of Ukraine. You're going to get crushed by fascism.
Yep.
So that's where we're at.
I think you're 1,000% right. It's important to understand, like, so like Spain, for instance, the Francoist regime was the second time Spain had been ruled by fascists. And before that, it was ruled by a monarchy. So the Second Spanish Republic, because I think it went like monarchy, republic, because that was monarchy, republic, the fascist dictatorship of Primo de Rivera, followed by the Second Spanish Republic, followed by the fascist insurrection, where Franco and a number of the other generals, Mola, for instance, tried to take over the country. In a lot of ways, this is. I was on This Is Revolution, and they asked me. They said, like, with Trump and the alt-right and the rise of like fascist, like, do you think that that is happening again? And I sort of answered it with, I think Karl Marx, when he was paraphrasing Hegel, was that like each historical movement and personage appears essentially twice, the first time as a tragedy and the second as farce.
Right.
Yeah. So like the Spanish Revolution, like the reason why the fascists were stopped in Barcelona, and General Goded was captured, put on trial, executed, and Durruti took his army of 10,000 anarchists to fight Franco in Madrid, while the entire area was, that was because the anarchists had been organizing and had these systems built, not simply to fight fascists, but to feed people, and to keep the power running and to keep the water going and sanitation. They had the ability to run not just one city, but the entire Argonne Front. They had that level of solidarity. And there was a level of natural political consciousness among the peasantry and the proletariat in Spain, that like even Nestor Makhno, when he was talking to Durruti about this, he was like, the conditions in Spain are better than they were in Ukraine. Like, the Iberian anarchists, you have deeper roots among the peasantry, and that's going to foster a stronger sense of solidarity and organization, but you've got to fight hard to keep that. And, they did, for 3 years, they managed to not only hold on to their territory, but, to go on the attack and to keep things running. And it really wasn't until they were suppressed by the Stalinists that society started to break down. A lot of people don't realize this, but like the Bolsheviks, the communists, the Bolsheviks, the big C communists, like when they took over, they were an anti-revolutionary force. They specifically worked to turn control of the collectivized farms and businesses back to the capitalists that owned them. Stalin was interested in political control. He was not interested in revolution. And then he got around to promptly losing the war after, attacking his own allies. Similarly, like if you look at, if you really read about Makhno and the Russian Revolution and stuff, you're going to find tankies often will be like, oh, obviously Marx-Leninism works and it's the best thing because they won their revolution and they beat their, they defeated the forces of reaction. So first, no, they didn't. Makhno defeated the forces of reaction twice. There would never have been a USSR without Makhno and the Black Army. And essentially what they wound up doing was they bided their time and betrayed Makhno at 2 key junctures. The first time because Trotsky met him and got this really weird, irrational hatred for him that almost doomed the Bolsheviks. And then the second time, the anarchists were unfortunately. It's funny I've got a page in Anarchy's Cossack because I always make notes like while I'm reading something to, so I can just go back and find it. I get like there's this one page and I'm just like, Makhno, you have to stop saving people who want you dead. Like Makhno had some Ned Stark energy at times, and it was very unfortunate. But yeah, I think the biggest mistake that the anarchists made in Ukraine was, one, they were a little too radical for anyone else to arm. And then 2, and this was the biggest thing, like they assumed that the Bolsheviks had either a level of humanity similar to theirs, or that even if the Bolsheviks were, completely, evil sociopaths, that it would be politically impossible for the Red Army to start fighting them after they just won the war for them.
Right.
Yeah, and That's
I
not
mean,
true.
the thing is that's a totally reasonable thing to think, and it's interesting because you might even looking at historical accounts of what was happening in Russia, the proletariat was exhausted. They did not want to continue. That's part of why Kronstadt took place, was because people were done. They were like, okay, we're done. Like, White Army has been routed. It's time to give us worker control and stop screwing around. I don't know about this war communism stuff. So it totally is reasonable that they're looking from Ukraine at Russia and they're like, no, surely they're not. They would not. They would just, why would you? It would be so absurd. And it's like, no, they were so hubristic, or I guess it's not hubris if they were right. They knew that they could essentially violence their way out of any problem that was arising. It didn't matter if the people were exhausted, if they were just going to massacre anybody who complained, as we saw with Kronstadt.
Yeah, or just look what Putin's doing right now. I remember years ago, there was I saw this. It wasn't really a meme because this was before there were memes, but somebody had created like a series of pictures of like World War II, like where it's like they're all gamers in a real-time strategy game, and at one point, like what's his face, the Hitler guy is like he goes and he's like, okay, I'm gonna go invade Russia, and Stalin's like, ha, you have underestimated just how many people I have and how little I care about them.
It's unfortunately accurate, even with the added caveat that they just did not have enough armament to arm the number of people they had, and that was like just a real problem for them, and also that they were facing famine conditions for a variety of reasons, some of which were political incompetence and some of which were, I don't know, not even their fault, just the ecology sucks.
There was also another big thing, because I don't want to just put this all on strategy.
Right.
You had mentioned earlier that we need to be building these structures.
Right.
I think, and I wrote this in the book on the page where I found it, one of the reasons why the Ukraine did not become the world's first anarchist nation, of whatever that looks like, a larger Ukrainian free territory enduring as long as another like modern nation state or something. It was largely because after the defeat, so Makhno got his forces whittled down to about 7,000. And that's when he had the whole Helm's Deep moment and crushed the White Army for the first time. After that, his rank swelled to about 80,000.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, like they had pretty much total control over Ukraine. They cracked open the banks and were just handing money to like needy people. They like had a whole thing. And they were ruling, but they were ruling in such a way that, like, when the peasants came up to them, assuming that they're their new bosses, they're just like, no, we came to free you from the reds and the whites. You figure out how you want to run your society. The biggest problem there was that a typhoid outbreak happened, and the typhoid outbreak took the Makhnovist forces down from 80,000 to like less than 20,000. I think maybe even as low as like 17 or something.
I assume those weren't all deaths. Some of those were probably just people getting so sick they couldn't serve, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and not only that, but like, when the Red Army betrayed them, I guess the first time? Yeah. I think it was the Red Army had a very weird relationship with Makhno, but when they like betrayed them like the first time, they had been knocked down to about 20,000, and the Red Army in the north had been largely spared that, so they had 500, 600,000 soldiers they could call upon. They were conscripts, but still, you got that many people. He said, and when they attacked and started like disarming Makhnovist units and massacring the ones that resisted, Makhno was like in a 10-day coma from typhoid.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, I mean, it was completely disrupted. And so, like I said in the book, I was like, okay, one of the most important things for any anarchist movement, sanitation. Like, I'm not saying that they were dirty. I don't think they were, but I don't think anyone was waiting for that kind of disease outbreak to hit, which they probably should have been just because of all of the dead from that war. You know, there were plenty of typhus outbreaks, you know, in the United States after and during the Civil War.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that when I look at the free territories, my criticism is that when they came to those places and they said, no, we're not going to tell you what to do, now you decide. I would say that the fundamental approach there is correct, which is to say, no, we're not going to take power. You should have power. But there does need to be something where it's like, but here's a suggestion, you know, like, here's how a council confederation works, you know, like here's how you can do delegation and, you know, revocable delegates and working group structures. And, you know, like it would have been nice if they could have been like, you don't have to do this, but here's what we're suggesting to all the other communes. And then having some sort of like durable standard framework by which all of these people could just snap it into place like Legos and just click, 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 everything will click together. And if people didn't want to, they didn't have to. But if they would have at least just had some kind of suggested logistical framework, I think that probably would have been quite a bit better.
No, I think you're 1,000% right. That struck me as coming from a good place, but being a bit too clueless. I think also it's probably just a bit from, you know, the Ukrainian anarchists did not have, you know, it's like Makhno said, they didn't have as deep roots among the peasantry. Like anarchism as a philosophy and way of living, like it does grow from the peasantry, and like it doesn't surprise me. Like I was looking at my family history after my son was born, and I found like some documents that my grandmother had written, and I found out that like, you know, my mother's side of my family, you know, we were peasants in the Carpathian Mountains, and I'm just like, yeah, okay, that tracks.
Yeah.
So like anarchism and peasant traditions, like they really go hand in hand.
Yes.
Yeah. And
no, I agree with you.
Now,
in fact, even to the degree where in places, say, take China, because I studied China a lot when I was doing The State is Counter-Revolutionary, when I was writing that. And it's funny because there was an urban anarchist constituency that totally existed. And they were somewhat influential, but the people that had the most widespread anarchistic notions were the peasantry, like to the degree where like China kind of had a hard time getting the buy-in of the peasants, except for that Mao like had I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? An affinity for them, that he actually saw them as potential allies and, you know, sought to go to the peasants in order to create a revolutionary force. But part of what I think makes the peasantry more amenable to an anarchistic mindset is that they have enough distance from the state to realize the state is not necessary to run their lives. Because if it were, their lives wouldn't work because the state doesn't do much in their daily lives. And when it does, it kind of just seems like an annoying complication that they wish they didn't have to worry about. And it's kind of easy to understand why rural populations therefore can't see why they should be paying taxes. They're like, what do I get for taxes? You know, like y'all haven't done an infrastructure program out here since the 1930s, you know, like, it's easy to see why they have that perspective. The state is distant, and when the state is involved in their lives, it's an annoyance.
Yeah.
So
honestly, I think that's one of the reasons why so many Americans kind of naturally gravitate in the sort of right-wing libertarian direction. That and, you know, just ginormous amounts of Koch brothers money and propaganda that buys.
Yep, I agree, and I actually have said numerous times that I think we need to try to focus on the rural areas and try to kind of create a bulwark against that right-wing libertarianism, because it's so pernicious. It plays on those anti-statist feelings and makes them think like, yeah, oh yeah, you hate the state, you hate how it dominates you, but isn't it cool when capitalists do it? And it's like, no, it's not cool when anybody does it. God damn it. Fuck that.
Yeah.
You know, like that's what needs to be conveyed to them. It's like, no, all the reasons you hate the state, you should also hate the capitalists for that reason. You are not going to be a billionaire. You are not going to be Elon Musk. You know, you are living in rural Appalachia, you know, like.
And I should add, even if you were Elon Musk, you would not be happy, because look, Elon Musk is not a happy guy.
Yes, he's definitely got divorced dad energy in spades. But but yeah, no, I think that's what really needs to be conveyed to them, is it's like, no, capitalism is also bad. And in that sense, I think that there is we could build a much stronger connection to people that are in rural areas. Also, it should be said, just because you're in a rural area doesn't mean you're like a diehard fascist or something, or even like, you know, it's funny because we all have like these kind of stereotypical views of people in rural areas. But if you just talk to people in rural areas, they're just people. Like, they just have all kinds of different viewpoints. I've met people in rural areas that are union people and don't get along with a lot of the conservatives in their area and don't like Fox News. But, you know, they're just living their life, you know, out in wherever, Bartlesville or something, you know. But yeah, it's like, I think that's one of the vectors we should be focusing on, trying to connect with the right-wing libertarians and to get them off of capitalism. That's one part of it. I don't know if fascists are savable in that sense. I'm not going to be devoting my energy to it. Maybe somebody else can. But yeah. Yeah.
I like to think that everyone is savable, and even if they're not, that you should probably still come from that direction. But yeah, what I'll say about fascists is, in my experience, fascists are bullies, and all bullies are cowards, and they will fold, you know, in the face of any level of overwhelming force. Not even, you know, so. You know, there a lot was made about the the Richard Spencer taking that punch. You know, you need to physically, or no, sorry, not physically, the opposite of that. You need to hypothetically bloody their nose in Minecraft.
Yes, hypothetically, yeah. Daniel says to the YouTube censors. No, but yeah. No, I mean, you know, they have to be suppressed.
Metaphorically, that was what I meant
to say. There we go. No, but the truth is that fascism just has to be suppressed, because fascism succeeds when it is able to suck all of the air out of the room. When, precisely as you say, they are able to be bullies unopposed, they have to be pushed back every single time. Every time they try to push somebody down, somebody has to push them down, and has to make sure they don't get back up, that they go home licking their wounds.
Exactly. You know, I think a lot of people that get pulled in that like heavily reactionary direction, you know, a lot of them are, you know, one, they're products of extremely authoritarian parenting styles. A lot of them have been abused. You know, you got to understand, like, you know, you kick a dog enough times, it's going to start snapping. And, you know, you can get to a point where you're so deep in that ideology, which in my opinion is pretty much just a death cult, like, where you're not going to come out of that unless something very serious changes about your life. And even then, like, you'll probably be a dick, just because, you know, when people are abused, that pain goes on to create more pain, and they replicate those patterns. And, you know, if you get into a bad enough, death spiral, you know, it keeps going until eventually, you know, people start actually dying, which is horrifying, and that's why that process needs to be arrested as quickly as possible. And like with the police at Occupy Wall Street, you know, you show up with 2,000 people, who are ready to stand there in solidarity with each other, they will back down. You know, it's just a matter of people having the will and the revolutionary consciousness to do something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And that's really where we're at. That's the stage we're really at in this whole struggle. And that's what I'm always trying to emphasize to people, is that what we should be trying to do is build big spanning networks, big horizontal power structures, federations or confederations of horizontal power structures, going to the people, meeting them where they're at, radicalizing people, creating more and more catalyst organizations that continue catalyzing more. Right? That's where we're at. We're not at the pick up your guns and go overthrow the government stage.
Shit.
I mean, it's like, we could get into a whole thing there. I definitely support leftists owning firearms, but I don't think that leftists should be owning firearms believing that the revolution is tomorrow and we're going to overthrow the state and capital and do mass expropriation campaigns as soon as we're all sufficiently armed. That wouldn't work. Just doesn't work. We have no historical account of that ever taking place and succeeding. And even like Ukraine, like we said, that went really rapidly without having built the roots. Actually, it was kind of a problem. We were just discussing how it was kind of a problem, and that it went way better in Spain because they built the roots for so long, right?
Yep.
Where they did spread that education for so long that by the time the rupture came around, they could say, in 2 weeks, we're going to go on a mass expropriation campaign, which literally it was 2 weeks notice, I think.
I mean, so with me, I honestly end up much more on sort of the Tolstoyan side of things. I'm a Buddhist, and I'm a big fan of Alan Watts. And I think part of what we need to be doing is not simply having the physical stuff, that's important, but also there needs to be a change in like revolutionary consciousness. My Buddhist sect talks about human revolution constantly. And I'm not going to say that it's like the change yourself, change the world, thing, because that's a cliche, and it very much, I think it's overstated, and I think a lot of the time it's just a way to get people to stop doing things to make their lot in life better. But at the same time, also, it is really important to change the way that you view yourself and your place within society, and your neighbors, to get out of sort of the egotistical thinking that Alan Watts says. It's the idea that we're a soul wrapped up in a bag of skin. I really think that when people begin to recognize that they are not simply themselves, but they are also themselves and their environment existing simultaneously, that pushes you in a very constructive revolutionary headspace, because I would have to get into like a big long Buddhist thing about it, so I'm not going to. But my point is that people get frustrated and they think that they can force this new world to be born, through only their own efforts, and that's just simply not the case. And one of the big things is that in the longest time in the United States, the labor movement was there, and really it got destroyed, in the during the Red Scare. But for the longest time, you had the Wobblies, you had Eugene Debs, you had stuff like the Battle of Blair Mountain, the Coal Wars. All of this stuff that was happening, in Europe was also happening in the United States. The biggest difference, I think, was simply that the United States did not have a great deal of revolutionary consciousness, and when that revolutionary consciousness was built up, it was then systematically destroyed in much the same way that Occupy was systematically destroyed. Just they had a much harder time putting down like the entire labor movement, and it really took everything from the New Deal to the horrors that had been released that became well known. It's interesting, by the way. Also, you mentioned that Mao had a higher regard for the peasantry, and that's very true. And like one of the things that Makhno says in the second issue of Durruti, which is another one of his direct quotes, was that like he literally said like if we had had the luxury of better allies, we blacks could have saved the Russian people. We could have prevented years of hunger by avoiding pointless, conflicts between workers and peasants. That's very much the case. And you talk about the Holodomor. Um, you know, the Ukraine became a occupied, colonized people that were used to feed the workers in the cities. And the Bolsheviks had all of their emphasis on the industrial proletariat and cared very, very little about the peasants, both in terms of their basic personhood, but also in their ability to run their own farms and lives and to do the thing that they've been doing since time immemorial. And of course, you wind up with a massive, completely unnecessary, uh, you know, um, famine. It's the same thing. It's like the Russian lefty version of like the British East India Company, like in India, overthrowing centuries of agrarian political structures and organizations to just simply extract as much wealth and power from India as possible. And I mean, that led to, I think, just in 1 year, 10% of the whole Indian subcontinent starved. Like, yeah. So I guess my point is that it is really important for people within society, especially if you find yourself in a more elite style position, to have more regard for the people that do the work to actually keep you fed. And then sadly, it's one of the things that happens when people get really rich and powerful. They just lose that part of themselves.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that there was this belief among a bunch of the Russian Marxists, especially, that the urban proletariat was the only revolutionary class, and that this was where capitalism had reached its most advanced form, and therefore they had the potential for the highest class consciousness. And that meant the peasants were just this backwards, inherently reactionary class of people that represented feudal mentalities rather than advanced capitalist consciousness. And therefore the peasants just had to begrudgingly be dragged into the next world by the urban proletariat. And that was so astonishingly disastrous everywhere that people believed it, that I am shocked to know that people still kind of think that way sometimes.
No, yeah, I mean, you were just sitting there talking about how, people in, no, rural areas and flyover states and stuff, the stereotype is, they're all these like Trump loving, sycophants. It's just not true.
Right.
You get into certain areas, there's when me and my wife, before 20, we got married, I think, the spring before, or no, was it October? Yeah. Okay. So it was right before Trump came on, because I remember watching like his third debate with Hillary while I was on my honeymoon with her. And you go through certain parts of like Ohio and stuff, and they've got all the boards, like the big pro-Trump barns painted that way and the giant signs. I recently drove to Iowa, and some weirdo had set up a series of signs, like small signs on the roadside, trying to have an argument about gun control with me as I drove through. And I'm just watching this and I'm thinking, like, that really stands out. But also, you got to think, who is the kind of person that's going to have the idea to do that, the money to do that? And and the very fact they have to set up these signs shows that they are not in lockstep. It's in much the same way that if a society has a whole bunch of rules and laws, that is a direct result of the society having a great deal of I guess corruption and law breaking. And if a society doesn't have to have that, that tends to mean that, things are much more functional because they don't have to be. So, just keep in mind that, when you encounter propaganda, either in the form of memes or television or some weirdo setting up signs every 15 feet for a mile or two.
Which, respect to that guy just for his commitment to the bit, not sure how convincing that's going to be. I'm pretty doubtful anybody's ever been convinced by a sign on the side of the road to take a different stance on gun control. But, I respect the grind, he really, really tried.
I'll say probably an interesting person.
Yeah, for real. If he went to that much trouble, he really is truly committed to changing the world. Maybe we should talk with that guy. But yeah, Casey, I see you in the chat there. Nothing has changed on my end, and other people can hear it. But I actually realize now that if you can't hear me, you can't hear me say this. So I guess I should have just ignored it. But anyway, sorry. Somebody in my chat was saying that they can't hear the stream. Yeah.
I just accidentally had Siri talking to me because they thought I was saying something to them. So that might have cut me off. Was it that they couldn't hear you?
No, they've been saying it for a little while. But anyway, no. Yeah. So I don't know how long you want to stay on here. We've been going for, I think it's like 2 hours, something like that.
Yeah. I'm having fun, but I definitely don't want to take up too much of your time. And I've got a con to get ready for. So,
well, I was thinking that I would stay on here and talk to my chat for a little while, but if you just want to, get everything wrapped up here, if you want to do a last pitch here, tell people where they can find the comic, maybe, go on a little spiel about it, get whatever your spiel is, it's time to do it.
Perfect. I'll plug my pluggables. So first off, by the way, thank you so much, Anark. I've been following your work. It's great that we met through Beezy. He's one of my favorite people in the world. And I remember when he first told me about you, I was like, okay, let's look this guy up. And I was like, okay, yeah, he's legit. So I really appreciate this. So guys, I do a lot of stuff. You can follow me on YouTube, where you will find I do political philosophy, Buddhism. I talk about Buddhism sometimes. I tend to have debates with weirdo right-wingers. If that's your thing, by all means, take advantage of my pain while I'm confronting some of these people. But also, and this is my main thing, I am a writer. Specifically, I am a writer of comic books at this point. My series Snow White Zombie Apocalypse was published by Scout Comics. It's in the comic stores now. And, we've gotten 2 Ringo Award nominations. My book was up there with books by freaking Stan Sakai and Neil Gaiman in some of these categories. So I was just like, oh, I'm not winning this, and I am totally fine with it. At the moment, I am doing one of my favorite series, Durruti Shadow of the People. The first and second issue have been funded on Kickstarter. The first one's out. The second one will be out very soon. I am currently running a special campaign specifically on Indiegogo to benefit Razom for Ukraine. It's a charity that engages in cultural work and life-saving mutual aid on the ground in Ukraine. They are, they're a liberal organization, but I try not to hold that too much against them. And they're a very high-rated charity, so that the work that they're doing is helping the people who, regardless of your perspective on the conflict, none of them asked for this and are living one of the worst things that a human being can ever have to deal with. So if you pledge to that Indiegogo, and if you can't pledge, please share it. There's a bunch of different levels. We have a little less than 10 days to go, and we have a little under $1,000 still left to get funded. When we do get funded, 30% is going to go straight to Razom, and they're going to be putting that into mutual aid efforts on the ground, specifically helping Ukrainian civilians who have been injured and displaced by this war. So you can get an awesome freaking comic where you can learn about Buenaventura Durruti from a writer that people apparently like my work. So it's a great keepsake. And by the way, the cover for this issue, which is unique to this, is absolutely badass. It is Nestor Makhno doing what he does best, which is gunning down white soldiers with a tachanka. So definitely check that out. Yeah, you can follow me. Google my name, Brenton Lengel. I'm at Brenton Lengel on Twitter. YouTube, I'm at The Friendly Anarchist. And I think Anarch has a link in the thing. And just go, if you want to find the Indiegogo, either follow the link below or just go on Indiegogo and type in DURRUTI, and you'll find it. Do not wait though, because with this, like, if we hit the 1,500, we get the money. If we don't hit the 1,500, nothing happens. So I really want to make sure we can hand over at least $500 to go towards mutual aid in Ukraine. All right, so thank you all very much, and thank you, Anarch.
Yeah, no, I was super happy to have you on here, and I actually really enjoyed this conversation. You have a wealth of knowledge about these figures.
That's awesome. Yeah, I get excited about shit and just kind of disappear into it for a little while. Thank you for letting me just, nerd out about this.
No, I loved it. I loved it. People have asked me to do streams that are about the practical real world examples. So here's a one stream for them. There'll be more to come.
Absolutely. And if people are wanting to see some practical real world things to do with anarchism, I always recommend this. This is one of the films that was critical to me, being radicalized, or, realizing that socialism and anarchism were not horrifically evil and insane things, because I was raised as a red-blooded American male, and one of the big things that led to me becoming an anarchist was arguing with anarchists online.
Nice. Oh my God, yeah. It does matter. You're saying it matters? Oh, damn. This changes my whole viewpoint.
I was arguing with some people in like a freaking goth forum, and I realized midway through the argument that anarchism was not what I thought it was, and that I would need to research it to win the argument. So I researched it, I learned what anarchism was, I came back, I won the argument, and then like 6 months later I was like, shit. Right.
You're like, damn it, I won the argument, but I was still wrong. Never mind.
Yeah. So yeah, you guys can find me. I do a bunch of crazy art stuff. I'm going to be at Chattanooga Comic-Con this weekend. That's what I'm getting ready for. If you are there, come by the booth. I'm going to be there with Scout Comics. You can get a signed copy of Durruti #1. And please, everyone who can, if just 10 people go in and do $100, we're already going to hit that. If you don't have that much money on hand, I totally understand it. You can get the series digitally for like $5, and if you have no money but you still want to help out, a share, it really, even one share will boost us in Indiegogo's algorithms, and that will translate to more people seeing the campaign, and we'll hit our goal. So yeah, thank you all very much, and thank you, Anarch. And I look forward. Let's talk again sometime soon.
Yeah, I'm down. We'll definitely stay in touch.
All right. Catch you later.
Right.
Bye.
See ya. All right. I assume everybody can still hear me and everything. I'm going to stick around and talk with chat for a little while. I still got energy. What I need to do here, however, is finish this, get rid of that. Boop. You sure you get rid of it? Yeah, there it is. It's gone. All right. So I'll stick around and talk with chat for a little while. First, however, I need to use the restroom and get myself a drink. So give me just a few minutes. I have returned. Hello, everyone. There we go. I am back. So I haven't done a live stream Q&A in a while, so I'm willing to stick around and answer questions if people are interested. Looks like nobody's really dropped off since the interview ended. Hello, Jerubot. So, update on the channel, A Modern Anarchism Part 3. The script is finished, editing is finished, voiceover is finished. All I have left to do now is just the visuals and music. And music usually takes place in the last part of visuals. So I'm trying to commit to finishing this video, A Modern Anarchism Part 3, before the end of the month. So that is my goal. I hope that I'm able to actually meet that goal. I think that this puts me very close to almost a year that it took me to finish this video essay, but I am very excited to show y'all. I think it is probably one of the most exceptional that I've created so far. I'm very proud of how far it's come. Another thing I'll mention, I decided I'd originally planned for this to be a 4-part series. And part 3 is a theory of revolution, by the way. It's going to be basically a big strategic guide, including like a strategic flow chart. And then part 4 was going to be like a tactical flow chart. However, I decided, as I have no conception of my own limitations, that I was going to add another part. So part 4 is now going to be a theory of organization. So it's going to be, how do organizations function? How do they grow? Basically expanding on some of the principles that were laid out in all of the previous parts, talking about how to build and expand an organization, different kinds of organizations, probably a little bit, if I can imagine, probably there's going to be a little bit of discussion between organizationalism and anti-organizationalism. There's probably going to be some discussion of when are formal organizations more valuable as opposed to, say, an affinity group model. How can they work together? Theories of above ground, below ground organizing. This stuff is all going to be in the next part 4. Sorry. For you guys, it'll be the part after next. You're about to see part 3 be released, hopefully by the end of the month. Then after that, I will begin part 4, which I have 400 words of the script written. So I got a lot of work left to do on writing the script for part 4. But that is where the series is at right now. Also, if any of you didn't know, part 1, Anarchist Analysis, has actually been published by Seditionist Media. So if you want to go find a copy of A Modern Anarchism Part 1, Anarchist Analysis, go over to Seditionist Media, their website, where you can get a copy of that book, or go over to their Twitter, where they will probably also just direct you in the correct place to get a copy of that. So there we go. Can you give a synopsis of what will be covered in part 3 of A Modern Anarchy? I'll I'll get back to the ones that were asked before that here in a moment, but yeah, it's a theory of revolution. Like I said, it's the strategy of revolution, and how can horizontal revolution take place? It's informed by the experiments of the past, but it kind of all fits together into a holistic, cohesive framework, which I hope can explain all possible outcomes, that it should explain all the data of all revolutions that have come before, horizontal revolutions, that is. And I hope it would also provide a framework by which all future revolutionary activity could be fit into. So I consider it to be a relatively important work, and I hope that it's influential and that it gives you an idea of the struggle at hand, and hopefully inspires revolutionaries abroad or wherever, I suppose, to do the necessary work and to have confidence and understanding of the conditions of what they face. But yeah, let's see here. Oh yeah. Okay, we'll go to the top. If not about today's politics, why support? Oh, no. That's something else. What are your opinions on Rojava? Rojava is an incredibly inspiring project. I think that everybody should be looking to Rojava you should be paying close attention to Rojava to see what happens, because I think that it is both incredibly inspiring, especially as an example of a liberatory project for women and a national liberation struggle that does not create a state, especially lacking a centralized apparatus. But there are some, there are some concerning components, and one of those being that the military still has a pretty hierarchical structure, and the head of that military is currently in talks with the Syrian government. So it's kind of a delicate time for Rojava. However, I am not going to conclude that it is over just because of that. I am keeping a very close watch on what's taking place there, as should everybody. There is an enormous amount we can learn from what's taking place in Rojava. And that's true if you're a communalist, a social ecologist, an anarchist, a libertarian socialist of any kind. Rojava is one of the most important things taking place on Earth right now, if you were to ask me. Got any favorite bands? I mean, like anybody, this is kind of just like when you ask me, I'm going to answer different things based on just what comes to mind. But like, the bands that I've liked for the most years, the ones I've come back to the most times, is like the Beatles and Radiohead. But like bands that I've liked a lot in the last few years, Proto Martyr, Parquet Courts. I like a lot of different kind of music, but yeah, I mean, those are the first things that came to mind. I don't know. I've been listening to a lot of post-punk in these last few years. I asked a question. Let me find it. What was that? What did that say? Damn. Oh, there's so much I missed. Dang. The canvas. I'm looking up here. Anarch defended my last stream from an ANCAP chatter. I'm here to return the favor. Any ANCAPs in chat? Oh, that's funny. I was talking with someone about anarchism. They agreed with me on just about every point, but claimed that tribalism would prevent such a system. What would you say to that kind of thing? I mean, I'm going to assume the person you were talking with is probably conservative. Conservatives are kind of like pathologically obsessed with the concept of tribalism. They truly believe that people can only consider and care about people in their immediate environment. Their ideology is often about shrinking the circle of empathy. And so they believe, they kind of like fundamentally think that everything's always going to devolve back down into tribes. And a lot of them think that you have to have a state to prevent these inherent tribal rivalries from blowing up into things that are extremely damaging and dangerous. I personally don't believe that. I think that tribalism is something that can definitely happen. Don't get me wrong. Cliquishness can definitely get out of control. But I do not hold the same belief that tribalism is like this, fundamental driving force to humanity. I think that the key to preventing tribalism is creating a space where everybody can actually arrive at consensus, that can make decisions together. Creating this common space is very important. If you were to have a system that is completely informal, then I actually think that an informal system would be more likely to produce this sort of tribalistic behavior, because there wouldn't be this common space where people can come together, arrive at consensus, iron out their differences, and so on. I think that's kind of one of the concerns with a more informal anti-organizationalist approach. I don't think that it could probably build a complex society. So I think in order to build a complex society, you have to build these sort of confederations of council structures wherein people come together at various scales in order to make decisions together, in order to overcome cliquishness and any sort of tribal behaviors that might arise. But I don't agree with the conservative that this is some existential problem for humanity. We have tons of examples of humans overcoming tribalistic ways of doing things. So I don't know. There's a lot more that could be said on that subject. I think if I've written on that at all, it's probably the best essay you'd go to look to is my essay, Human Nature. And that one might give you at least some of my broader understanding of the topic. Let's see here. So I've been studying your reading list on anarchist literature, and the texts are amazing. At the cafe is pretty awesome. It'd be cool if the dialogues were adapted into film format. Damn, you're kind of onto something here, because I've actually talked to a couple other YouTubers that we also think that some kind of adaptation of At the Cafe, either the literal book or kind of like a modern version of it, would be really cool to do like a big collaborative video essay. So, you're definitely on the same track as a few people I've talked to. However, that's been in the works for a long time, so no promises about that coming to fruition anytime soon, but I agree. I think that something like At the Cafe, or maybe just literally At the Cafe, would be a really cool project for several of us video essayists to work on together. Probably also the kind of thing I would be more likely to work on if I could support myself full-time on Patreon. So here is a link to my Patreon, patreon.com/anarch. Go become a patron if you want to see me do more stuff. You want to see me, for example, do these live streams more often. I think that if I could get to the point where I could just rely on the Patreon for all of my income, I'd probably try to do one of these live streams every month. I might also try to do shorter video essays in between. If I can support myself fully on the channel, I can devote more of my time to the channel. So I just want to say that's where we're at. So you want to see the channel expand, produce more content, go become a patron at my Patreon. Let's see here. It refreshed. Fantastic. Gotta love it. What do you think of Unlearning Economics' critique of anarchism? Haven't heard it. He makes the critique that anarchist societies can't replicate welfare and will not be able to guarantee minimum standards of living. I don't see any reason to believe that. I just literally can't even understand why one would think that. If in an anarchist society, the people have complete control over the distribution of resources, then they also have control over those resources being distributed to people that are in need. They're not only distributed to people who work, they're distributed as the people please. So if the people want to produce welfare, they can produce welfare. And I suspect that's exactly what they would do. In fact, if it were anarcho-communist, the people just have to request the distribution, and they just get the distribution if the resources are available. So yeah, I don't understand that critique at all. I think it probably rests on a complete misunderstanding of what anarchism actually advocates. I've never heard a system of anarchism besides maybe some kind of like anti-organizationalist, do whatever you want kind of thing, where there would not be some mechanism through which we could create a system that would provide to people who need help, who are disabled or elderly or young, for example. I think that that's 100% within the realm of what an anarchist system could provide. What are your normative and metaethical views? I am an ethical naturalist. That is to say, I believe that ethics derive from natural facts, that our conditions as human beings and our relation to facts about reality determine the proper ethical standards that we should follow. And I believe that those ethical standards should be derived through some form of consequentialism, with regards, maybe some kind of, you might consider my view to be some kind of like consequentialism that sees the use for both a sort of rule utilitarianism and an act utilitarianism. That is to say that I think that you choose between them depending on the amount of knowledge you have about something. That is, if I know a lot about the outcomes of my actions, I choose act utilitarianism. That is to say, I care about the consequences of the action, and that's how I make a decision about if it is or is not ethical. Are the consequences to my action good or not? That is if I have high knowledge about the outcomes of my actions. If I have low knowledge about the outcomes of my actions, then you choose rule utilitarianism. That is to say, you've developed rules based on consequences, both of the past and suspected consequences, and you follow the appropriate ethical rules which have been developed about those because you don't necessarily know what the outcomes of your actions are going to be. And so that's my ethical framework, which I guess is pretty freaking complicated now that I try to say it out loud, but I could go on about that. I am not going to go on about that. Maybe some other time. I've had numerous people ask me to do a video about ethics and anarchism. And so eventually I may create a video which talks about ethics and the importance of ethics. Yeah, Jerubot pretty much seems weird considering Revolutionary Aragon did provide basic needs for free. Yeah, like I don't know of an anarchist project that had a problem with this. It kind of seems more like they must be just thinking of some kind of abstraction of anarchism. They probably don't know anything about the actual historical examples, and they probably don't know how flexible the conceptions of anarchists really are. So they probably don't understand that there are lots of different approaches that anarchists might take to fixing problems, and that it basically is just the root of from the bottom up we make decisions. So like from the bottom up we could totally make a decision to structure society however we please. Okay. What do you think about quantitative approaches to democratic institutions like quadratic voting? Do you think there should be more effort towards scientific democratic theory? I don't know enough about quantitative approaches to democratic institutions like quadratic voting, so I'm not going to weigh in on that at all. But should there be more effort towards scientific democratic theory? 100% yes. In fact, I think this is something that if anarchists were a little more prevalent in academia, we would have already seen way more research into that. I'd like to do some research and theorizing on that myself. I know there's actually kind of a lot of material in different kinds of democratic voting methods. However, I think that there's probably always more work to be done on establishing good democratic norms and trying to understand what it looks like to create a democratic system that emphasizes agency, decentralization, horizontal power in general. Do you think that genocide, denialism, and cults of personality are serious issues within certain sects of the left? I mean, yeah, 100%. The authoritarian leftists just have an enormous problem with this. And the reason is because their ideology kind of carries out genocides a lot. It's based in hierarchical power, and hierarchical power always seeks to make the world conform to the demands of the top of the hierarchy. And in doing so, it has to force that world into it. But the world doesn't want to fit into these rigid schemas of a pyramidal structure. The world is complex and has in all of the elements and combinations of elements have their own complex agencies. And with that in mind, the top of a pyramid can never force the world into its schema except through violence, large-scale violence or threat of violence, or deception, what I call domination. Those three things: outright violence, threat of violence, threat in general, or deception. That is one of the characteristic features of hierarchical power. So, of course, authoritarians are going to have to defend genocide. They essentially have a genocidal ideology by nature. And cults of personality, of course, once again, it's pyramidal. So they're going to be obsessed with whoever is at the top of their power structure. This is why in minutia, when you see their organizations, they often just function literally like cults. In fact, several examples come immediately to mind. CPI, for example, with Caleb Maupin, Black Hammer with Ghazi Kodzo, and other examples, which I won't get into here, but I've heard many other examples of authoritarian organizations, and I'm talking about authoritarian left organizations, that basically just function like cults. You scale that up to the size of a society and you get dictatorship, and that's what they advocate. So they essentially want a society-wide cult, and the only way you can maintain a society-wide cult is through violence, through abject violence, threat, and deception. How about Pakistan kidnapping the prime minister? I'm confused. What is that? You're just asking what I think about that? I mean, I don't know enough about it to know, I can't weigh in on that because I don't know about the scenario. I guess it would depend on who did the kidnapping and what their demands are and so on, I don't know enough to weigh in on it. Nice. Shout out to Proto Martyr. Yes. The reason I'm skeptical of anarchists' ability to provide welfare because almost all welfare is provided by the state and poverty was mostly reduced by social spending worldwide. I mean, yeah, that's because states exist in most places worldwide. So that's kind of a confounding fact to that statistic. You would have to actually compare the standard of welfare that was being provided in any given society and then compare it based on resources available to anarchist societies after they were implemented. And to my knowledge, in pretty much every example you'll look at, welfare was improved when anarchists took power, not vice versa. And in fact, states have historically really only wanted to provide welfare precisely when they felt at threat of being destroyed or overthrown. That's why we got the New Deal here in the United States in the early 1900s, for example. That's why places like Sweden, Netherlands, Norway, those places were all afraid of revolutions. And they used these parliamentary means to essentially diminish those revolutions. And yeah, so I don't think that that's a very useful observation. Yeah, I mean, then precisely people kind of get to that real quick, there in the chat, people kind of say very similar things. Thank you. You love the mushroom shirt? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let's see here. Same. It's kernel of truth, the need for concentrating to that kind of will. States are also. Yeah, so you use two-level of utilitarianism as a practical method of decision-making. Got it. Yeah, I mean, basically. You know, I'm just broadly a consequentialist. I just kind of discern that, you know, the consequences, you know, you concern yourself with the consequences purely when you know the outcome of an act, which is to say when you can know the consequences very well. And when you don't have high confidence about your consequences, you choose rule utilitarianism. Whatever ethical rules you've established beforehand, you kind of abide by those just to stay safe and to make sure that the consequences aren't going to harm somebody. What would you say to the critique that Rojava has a police force and prison system? Police force, kind of. I mean, that one, I think that's a little overstated. What they have is like community defense, and people are rotated through positions in that community defense, and there is a process of sortition, and they can be revoked at any time. That's not really a police force. A police force is a professional group of people who enforce laws. They are hired and fired by a bureau. They have a hierarchical structure, and they cannot just be revoked at a whim by the people. There's no delegation, and they enforce laws not decided by the people. But that's not really what's happening in Rojava. You know, they've essentially developed the laws, or, you know, whatever you want to call them, laws, rules, whatever. They're by themselves through their community councils. They do both sortition and rotation of people that are in this community defense. Yeah, it's not really a police force. That's just not really accurate. As for a prison system, yeah, I mean, it's basically accurate. They do basically have a prison system. My understanding is that prison system at the moment mostly just has like ISIS militants. I don't think they have almost any people from domestically there in those prisons. That being said, I mean, you know, that's a fair criticism. You know, if people are going to say they have a prison system, they do. I don't know if I would let ISIS militants out if I were in their situation. I don't know if I'd do anything different. You know, I think that's an open conversation. Will communes provide welfare outside their communes or just for in their commune? Well, this is kind of an important thing. And I think what a lot of people, this is one of the most common things that people miss when they understand anarchism. They think that anarchism just wants a bunch of disconnected communes. It doesn't. It wants communes that are federated together or confederated together into various layers of organization. So there may be, a federation where all the communes of that area come together and make decisions together. And then one for, the bigger region, one for then, almost your whole national territory, and then one for your whole continent, and so on. Right. So like there'll be various scales wherein these decisions can be made. So if they want to provide some large scale, welfare system, as we're calling it, to everybody within some territory, they could just do that within the territorial confederation of all their councils. So anarchism does not advocate that it's just a single layer of communes that are all self-sufficient all by themselves. That is a misunderstanding of anarchism. That has never been what anarchism advocated. So will they provide welfare outside their communes? I suspect. I mean, solidarity is one of the key principles of anarchism. Do you plan to do any videos on how to deal with antisocial behavior? The EZLN seems to have an interesting restorative approach. I mean, I consider that one of the big challenges of the modern era. what we've seen is that, even when you make a better society, that doesn't mean some people aren't going to still do terrible things to one another. How do you deal with it? I mean, step number one is you create a society where those antisocial behaviors really don't get people very much, right? Step number two is you want to take an inherently restorative approach. You want to assume the person can be made better, that they can not repeat those behaviors, number one, and that the person who has been harmed is restored to the maximum degree possible. You want to simultaneously prioritize both of those. You don't assume a person can't be made better, and you do the absolute most to make sure that the person who is harmed has their harm remediated. If a person, after that numerous times of going through that process, continues to harm people, I don't know. That society is going to have to determine what to do with that. I will say, yeah, I think that person should be excluded from society, or if people want to kick them out or exile them to some other place, that seems reasonable. They can freely disassociate from that person. If that person has no place left to go, well, maybe there's some place left over where people that nobody wants in their society go. Maybe there's some, place that has been set out for all of these antisocial people to only live with other antisocial people. That's one solution. In my video after the revolution, I give at least a conceivable solution to the problem. So it's kind of in those lines. I haven't read specifically about what EZLN does, so I can't weigh in on that. Yeah, and as Meineke Man says, in anarchist communism, well-being is guaranteed to all. Oh, damn it. It just refreshed. Well-being is guaranteed to all on the principle of each according to ability, to each according to need. Yeah, if we're talking about anarcho-communism, this whole thing about welfare is just meaningless. Like, as I said earlier, like, a person needs something, they just get it. Like, it's communism, from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. The free association of free producers. You don't need a quote unquote welfare system. It's just unnecessary. Welfare exists because this system doesn't do what it needs to do. It doesn't provide people their needs. Welfare is a social safety net because people are constantly getting left behind by the society. So anarchist communism isn't going to have that problem. Yeah, Meineke's just nailing it here. Yeah. What's my opinion on Stranja commune? I don't know what that is. Straight up, don't know. So I'd be interested to learn more, but I don't know what it is actually. Where do we start building a new system? In the here and now. You begin building the structures wherever they are available. You begin by building horizontal organizations that themselves act like catalysts that do popular education, and then reach out to other organizations that try to provide assistance to social movements. You establish cooperatives. You establish mutual aid networks. You begin building the new in the shell of the old. How do we build a horizontal power structure of government from where we are now? Like I just said, and probably a good method here is to begin building like neighborhood councils or neighborhood pods, as they've sometimes been called. I think that you might be interested in my video, Constructing the Revolution. So go to my channel and look up Constructing the Revolution. It's a video essay. Eugene, Oregon has a lot of anarchists. We get beat down often. We need more structure. Yeah, I mean, not trying to trash talk anybody, but the Pacific Northwest has a lot of anti-organizationalist anarchists, and it's not to their benefit. I think that they need to establish more structure. There needs to be more organization just really all down the West Coast. The West Coast has lots of anarchists, but they are not very powerful because they're not very organized. They're constantly feuding with one another, and they're deathly afraid of organization. And once again, no offense intended. I understand a few of you might be in my audience, and I think that overall you're doing good work, but y'all need to be organized and stop fighting with one another. Build a power structure that you can hold together and that can actually build power for the people. So let's see here. Yeah, people are just killing it though. People are giving great answers here. Basically the answers I've ended up giving to a lot of these questions. How do you find out what is going on in the world generally? I mean, I got to be honest, straightforward answer to this is Twitter and YouTube. That's the actual truth. I try to follow a wide variety of different kinds of accounts, try to find anarchists and libertarian socialists in like every country. So, I'll follow small accounts if those accounts are giving me a good, sense of what's happening in some area of the world, so long as they're like an anarchist or libertarian socialist. I will follow like war reporters, for example. Jake Hanran is a good example of that. I'll follow official sources if those sources are giving useful information. I follow a ton of accounts just based around the EZLN and Rojava. Yeah, I try to keep this, a well-rounded, I try to make sure that I follow accounts in all kinds of different countries, not just the country I'm in. So that's my solution, but everybody's going to approach it a little different. That's just me. I was just thinking also how if there is a psychological drive for some to control others, how is that handled? Well, I think that's kind of the importance of anarchism. The importance of anarchism is that it's building a structure such that those people don't really have an avenue to do that. The danger of hierarchy is that it builds a structure which is pre-constructed to be exploited by those kinds of people. If you think about it, if I'm the sort of person who wants to exploit others, which is better? A system wherein there is already a series of positions that exploit people and I just have to get into one of them, and that if I get into one of them, it'll be easier for me to get into the one above that and the one above that and the one above that, and then be able to exploit more and more people. Or the system where I have to convince all the people I want to exploit to let me exploit them, where I have to convince thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of people to agree that I should be allowed to exploit them before I get the power to exploit them. I think you can see that anarchism is actually less susceptible to that. So that's kind of the point of anarchism, in fact. It's a system built to make it hard for tyrants to hoard power. I find a lot of criticism. Oh, dang it. It just keeps refreshing. Yeah, I find a lot of criticisms of anarchism start by the conflation of governments or governance and states. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't help that this word government is really very unclear what people mean by that. Anarchists often also say they're against government, but if what we mean by government is just the administration of things, the administration of civil society, then the anarchist is not anti-government. They do, in fact, want to administrate, a civil society together. But if what is meant by government is a group, is a class or a group of people that control the administration of society, and no, not really, because or if even the only way you could understand it then is that everybody in society is the government, but I broadly agree with you. I think that this word has seen some semantic drift since the theorists that, are the foundational theorists of anarchism, and that in the modern day, people would understand self-government or community government as being a form of government. So I think that it can be useful to explain to people that anarchists want, horizontal governance or self-governance instead of the state. That can be helpful to help people understand. But some people also are just going to be kind of confused by this word government. What do you think about the segment of people who advocate for punitive justice in an anarchist society, KYLR and stuff? I mean, that's one of these things where I wouldn't want that to become normalized. Like that's not the default. I would hope it wouldn't be the default approach to problems, but there are situations where it would be self-defense. If there is somebody who is an exploiter, an abuser, and they're just going around hurting one person after another, it kind of is community self-defense for people to stop them under any means necessary. However, I would hope that there were way better solutions than that. It just really seems like the wrong solution to default to killing people as that means for self-defense. It'd be far better to go through a process of restorative justice where we try to find out how to actually help both the person who carried out the harm so they don't harm more people, and try to present some form of restoration to the person who has been harmed to the maximal degree possible. That's the ideal scenario, and I think that should be the default anarchist approach. But if somebody has gone around abusing or exploiting numerous people, I'm also probably not going to cry a river if somebody defends themselves in that sense as KYLR. So yeah, I don't like the normalization of that phrase. I don't think that we should want a society where all of our problems are solved through a vigilante form of justice. I think that that's fundamentally able to be abused by the worst people. Okay, thanks. I understand it a bit more. Last question. How would you describe the economic system of anarchism? Is it a gift economy, a market economy, a planning economy, or a combination of multiple structures? Well, I think what you're going to find is that anarchists generally just say that they don't want to settle on the answer to that too quickly. I think the ideal here is that it is a sort of planned gift economy. Okay, decentrally planned gift economy. But I think what you'll also find is that anarchists, both theoretically and in practice, end up using a sort of like mixture of a market and a planned system. So there's a sort of decentrally planned component, and there is a sort of market component. And the market component exists in order to sort of protect the direct distribution gift economy portion. So we'll use the Spanish Revolution as an example, given the context of our stream. In the Spanish Revolution, the urban centers were very much market-oriented, and they were controlled by federations of cooperatives. And the cooperatives, distributed things both based on planning, like distribution of planned distribution, but also just distribution by money. It was just an easier way to manage things. Whereas out in the countrysides, most of the products of the country or agricultural sector were directly distributed. It was a gift economy in that sense. And that was actually one of the most productive sectors of the entire economy. It was, in fact, their army never went hungry. They had no problems with starvation. So, but what do anarchists advocate as the end goal? Yeah, a form of kind of like a decentrally planned gift economy, you might say. That's basically what communism is, a decentrally planned gift economy. Hi, Anarch. Have really enjoyed your recent vids, specifically the ones about talking to liberals and conservatives. Awesome. Yeah, those videos, I had hoped people would find those useful. Ultimately, I had hoped that the liberals and conservatives would find them, but the algorithm pretty much does not promote my material outside of my bubble. So if you want liberals and conservatives to see it, y'all are going to have to actually share it to the liberals and conservatives. But hopefully that kind of at least gave you an idea of how I would approach conversation with those groups. Yeah, Sandra says, I think that also anarchy is still not really understood well by the public, so then more education about it. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's really at the stage we're at. You know, we're at this popular education stage. We need to create more catalysts. We need to act like catalysts, creating more catalysts. We need to be autocatalytic, as they say in science. That's where we're at. We need to be spreading radical consciousness. And the fact that people are not educated, it should not be a shock. They've been miseducated on purpose. How would non-horizontal organizations receive funds? I want to start my own org and maybe a food co-op. Yeah, I mean, a food co-op would be a great way to receive funds, right? You know, just making the money that way and then funneling it into an org. That's what I think is a great idea. In fact, that's kind of the game plan of the whole cooperation movement, like Cooperation Tulsa, Cooperation Jackson, and so on. You know, all those symbiosis member groups. That's kind of what they're trying to do. Build some form of cooperatives to fund their orgs, and of course, everybody's doing that to differing success, of course. But that's a great way to do it if you can pull it off. What's your process for script writing and video making? Yeah, I've actually had a surprising number of people ask this question. I'm a little surprised that y'all are interested in that, but my process for script writing, that is hard to describe because the writing process is actually a relatively complicated process for almost anybody. But I would say first I ask myself, what topics am I going to cover in the essay? Then I literally just put them as like words or the names of those topics into the essay. And then I start ordering them. I like order and reorder the topics. And that comprises like a skeleton for the work that is going to come. Then what I start doing is I just start kind of like, ideating on each of these topics. So I start kind of like fleshing them out into like a paragraph and a paragraph and a paragraph. And I might do some organization and reorganization there. Then what I start doing is I start asking myself, how can I seg between these? You know, what gets me from this subject to that subject? What gets me from this subject to that subject? How do I build bridges from here to here to here to here? And then as I do that, I start seeing it kind of come into fruition. I start seeing that everything is coming together in a sense. And I start to go, oh, okay, now I can see the total narrative is coming together. And I start to then do final organizing and reorganizing and so on. I don't do any edits until this whole part of the process is finished. I only begin smoothing and massaging and making everything pretty after everything I just said is basically completely done. Then I go through and I start editing and editing and editing and editing, and I'm cutting tons of material. In fact, for this upcoming script, I've cut roughly as much as remains in the script. The script came out somewhere around 17,000 words, think like 17.5 thousand words. And the cut document has like 14,000 words in it. So that is how much material that I write for these videos. If I could go on forever and there wasn't the you know, strictures of being on YouTube and having, you know, trying to make videos and so on, you know, this video upcoming part 3, it'd be like 2 times as long. It would be huge. It'd be ridiculous. So yeah, then I ask myself, is there any repetition? And repetition just gets taken out. If there is repetition, if it makes it into the final product, it's basically an accident. Like I try not to do any repetition. These things are 2-hour video essays, 2.5-hour video essays where theoretically I'm trying not to repeat myself at all unless I'm like going and backtracking, being like, remember when I said X? Well, what I meant was, and like unpack it. But I'm trying not to repeat myself. So that's why these are so dense. If you're wondering why those big video essays are so dense, it's because I'm packing the most information into those as I conceivably can. And I'm really like, you know, people think I should edit them. It's like, it was edited. This is 50% of the length it would be if it were not edited down. So I'm a very long-winded person. Okay, boom. I reached the end of the chat. I caught up with y'all. We got 26 people watching. I can't believe that we maintained 26 people this long. Pretty impressive. All right. Do you consider yourself an anti-theist? Yeah. I personally do not think religion is good. But I also understand that it would be absolutely foolish to try to split coalitions between religious and non-religious radicals when we have so much that we have to deal with. We have huge problems. We have to carry out massive structures of solidarity, and that's not gonna happen if we're spending our time arguing with one another about religion. My opinion is that religion is not good, but it's really just, I think that it's largely inappropriate to bring that into organizing spaces. I think that it leads to unnecessary conflict, and that religious anarchists and non-religious anarchists can organize together. And that in a society after revolution or post-revolution, after, there's some very large scale social transformation, I would still want us a pluralistic society. I would still want a society where all religious perspectives can exist, but wherein no religious or a non-religious perspective gets to domineer over everyone else. I think that's what has to be established. You have to create a pluralistic environment, a world in which many worlds can live. In that society, I'd probably be a little more vocal about anti-theism, but as it stands, I just don't think it's really a good, I'm not going to die on that hill. And people also seem to have very strong knee-jerk reactions to you saying that you don't think religion is good. People get very defensive, they get very upset, and there's almost never a rational discussion to be had. So I don't really talk about it very much. Night unpredictable axolotl. Do you think various anarchist figures are susceptible to idolization of cults of personality? Yes, 100%. How do you suggest anarchists deal with these issues? I don't know. It's tough. I've said before, it's like there's some amount where leaders are just going to pop up. I don't think leaders are necessarily bad, which is to say, we sort of defer to the expertise of certain people who we respect the knowledge they have, and we think they've, really thought things out. That's not bad in and of itself. It's bad when leaders get to make decisions for the rest of us. It's also bad when those leaders become unquestioned. That's kind of what you're getting at here with this idolization or cults of personality. I think that it's weird because we actually have a tendency to do both in anarchist spaces. We have this tendency both to idolize and form cults of personality around certain people, especially historic figures. But we also have a tendency to just tear down people who we can see are like gaining any position of popularity or influence. And we weirdly want to try to tear down key figures within the movement. And I don't think that you're going to fix the problem of idolization or cults of personality by trying to cruelly tear people down. I think that what you have to do is you have to create an environment where there can be rational critique and wherein people can be aware of their parasocial attitudes. Because I think that's a big problem. A lot of people are not aware how parasocial their attitudes are. They develop these extreme attachments, parasocial attachments with people, and that leads to the cults of personality. And sometimes they develop parasocial hatred, where they think this person is their nemesis, even though the person literally has no idea who they are, right? And that's also unhealthy, okay? What we need is an environment where people recognize that these figures who we respect are just people, And that even though we might respect their expertise, or we might be glad that they have a platform where they can educate people, or where they can spread popular education of a sort, that we have to be able to criticize them, but we have to actually be able to criticize them on the merits of what they're saying, and not our weird, knee-jerk, obsessive, parasocial beliefs of what they think. And that's difficult. That's difficult, admittedly. But I think that is one of those things that's just a cultural issue. It's not one of those things you're going to fix by structure or form, it's not like an organization is going to be structured any further than just being a horizontal organization to fix that problem. We have to fix it as a culture. We have to try to develop a culture where we have lots of organic intellectuals, where people really take their own education seriously. They try to form their opinions based on what they've studied and understood about the world, based on their experience and their research, and who can engage in good faith with people they agree and disagree with. That's the only way you're actually going to diminish cults of personality and idolization. And well, that's a cultural problem. So everybody has to take part in having that better behavior. Regarding your essays, I honestly thought you had a PhD in anarchism like Anarcho-Pack. Was impressed to find out you were actually a physicist. Yeah, no, I just read and read and read on my own. I've probably done as much research as a person who might have a PhD in anarchism, but I don't have a degree of any sort. Zoe's degree, I think, is in history. Yeah, it's in history, but specifically the focus was in the revolutionary history of anarchism. I do think she's way more knowledgeable than I am. I think both about theory and history. She's an incredibly educated person. And I look to her to learn more. So I think y'all should do the same. In a general sense, if me and Zoe disagree, Zoe's probably right. Speaking to conservative video, a lot of my family's down the Andrew Tate rabbit hole. Jesus Christ. That's bad. It's real bad. As a Christian, I think disliking religion, especially organized religion, is a very respectable and understandable take. Thank you for that's a very uncommon belief among Christians. So I appreciate you being able to take that more pluralistic approach. Usually about the Andrew Tate rabbit hole. Usually I would tell them to go fuck themselves, but they're my family. How do I convince them out of it? I mean, damn, if they're Andrew Tate, they probably have so much misogyny. They just mean that patriarchy has probably just done a number on their brains. I think you'd have to dismantle so much social conditioning. Probably you'd really need to find the sticking point for why somebody like Andrew Tate is persuasive to them. Is it just his swagger and machismo? Well, then tear his arguments apart. Is it because he's a misogynist and they also hate women? Then you're going to have a lot of work to do just dismantling their misogyny. But, that kind of viewpoint is almost the same viewpoint as like a fascist. I mean, there's a hair's breadth of difference and their audiences enormously overlap. So it's going to be hard. You're going to have to find what the actual justifying beliefs are. You're not going to be able to just attack Andrew Tate probably. And if you did, they just move on to someone else because the underlying beliefs have remained the same, and somebody else will just say those and not be Andrew Tate, and then they'll just agree with that person next. They'll be like, oh man, Nick Fuentes is great. So yeah, how do you convince them out of it? You're going to have to find out why they're persuaded by Andrew Tate. What is the persuasive aspect of him? And then you'll need to undermine those ideas. Yeah. I agree that religious socialists and anarchists can and should organize alongside atheists, especially since a good chunk of the global working class adheres to some sort of religion. Yeah, it's exactly my position. Here in Oklahoma, so many people are Christians, even some of our anarchists. And so I take the position, it's like, oh, you're a Christian anarchist. That's fine. Like, I don't need to get into a conversation with you about why I disagree with Christianity. If you came to anarchism through Christianity, that's fine. And if what's going to be persuasive to a large number of rural people, for example, is conservative Christianity, then boom, I'm happy to give them that anarchist, or not conservative Christianity, anarchist Christianity or Christian anarchism. I'm happy to give them those Christian anarchist resources. If that's what is persuasive to them so that they can, act as anarchists in the world, then that's fine. So this might be a weird question. Are you cautious about speaking politics or social issues when in public or meeting new people? Me? No. But I should say, I think that's going to be different for everybody, and it's going to be different for your circumstance as well. So me, I think because I'm a cis-het white man and because I project confidence and education, in a general sense, when I say I'm an anarchist and I want to dismantle all hierarchical power structures, people don't just immediately dismiss me. So it actually kind of is beneficial because it changes their view of what anarchism is, because I don't probably represent the stereotype of what they think an anarchist is. However, if you don't have this big confluence of privileged identities, they're probably going to approach you saying that a little different. I would say the most important thing when talking to somebody about politics is just kind of meeting them where they're at and finding that little seed that you think that if you plant it might crack the foundations of their belief system. You don't need to get over eager and go all the way and be, tell them that you're a revolutionary anarchist. You just need to get them to doubt the principles of a hierarchical society. And that might be really like small things. That might be really small things. So the small statements can make a big difference in people's conception of the rest of their belief system. Little tiny seeds can grow into big trees and just totally destroy the foundation. And sometimes you got to give people time to go on that journey as well. You need to be patient with people. So I'm not cautious. I pretty much just say it. Pretty much the only time I don't say it is if I'm in a workplace, because I don't want to be fired. Let's see here. Question: if a demographic holds natural representational disadvantages, i.e. queer people being much less common than non-queer, would that just simply be a permanent power discrepancy? No, that isn't a power discrepancy unless you have a representative form of government. Or if you use majoritarianism, which is to say, you say like 50 plus 1%, then yeah, that's going to be bad for the minority. But the higher that majority gets, the less of a problem that's going to be, because generally even those non-majority populations are going to be at least single-digit percentages. Take trans people in modern society. I think the percentages I've seen are somewhere between, I think it's like 2 and 5%. And we're still in a society that is very transphobic. So it's quite possible you'd see even higher numbers than that. So if all you did was get your numbers up to, 95, 98% or whatever needed to pass measures, you would still probably not be able to shut out minorities, especially not, if you're looking at like non-white people, the majority of people in the United States, for example, are non-white. So the minority in that sense would be white people. So I will say, I think that there are problems with minorities not being represented by majoritarianism. And it's the reason why I think we should be trying to approach consensus instead of using majoritarianism. Yeah. But I also think a solution, for example, we look at Rojava. What's Rojava do with this problem? It creates councils of those minority populations. And if a measure would be passed that bears on those minority populations essentially get to intervene on the passage of that measure. For example, they have one for women and they have one for Assyrian Christians. because both of them have been historically disadvantaged. And so those women's councils, they like intervene on if there's going to be some decision made about women. And that has been enormously helpful and has empowered women in Rojava. So something like that might be helpful. Let's say, post-revolution, we have a problem where queer people are a minority that's not getting listened to. Their voice isn't being heard. Well, they could create a queer people's council, and then that council could have like veto powers and stuff. So, there are solutions. These are the sorts of solutions we might see. Have you heard the speech forms? The speech, Forms of Freedom by Bookchin, about how the anarchist confederalist philosophy is already within the American thought, but it's just so buried on so much stuff? Yeah, I think I actually have. Yeah, I think I've heard that exact speech, and it's really, really good. And I agree. Yeah, I know. I actually agree that that's kind of part of what Bookchin was doing. Bookchin was creating an anarchist philosophy that was advantageously oriented within Western thought, while essentially indigenizing that, introducing an indigenous viewpoint through social ecology. So I think Bookchin did an excellent job at that. And I think it's why that you'll find that if you introduce Murray Bookchin's conceptions to the average American, they're going to be actually a little more receptive to that than they are to just anarchism writ large. The language he developed had its roots in Western thought, and he doesn't like demonize the history of Western thought, but he still recognizes its flaws. He still recognizes the, mistakes of hierarchy and how hierarchy was embedded in those structures. So I actually think that communalism and social ecology are very well situated to communicate to people within like the United States or Canada or the UK. Apparently, though, way broader than that. I mean, the place that implemented his ideas in the largest scale is Rojava. So, yeah, there's definitely some promise to what Bookchin is saying there. Another thing, I have pretty intense social anxiety, so it might be part of it, but also I often struggle to talk about social issues with members of oppressed groups. I worry about unintentional isms. Yeah. Well, what I would say about that is that that's an understandable worry. I think that insofar as that you're concerned about that, you just need to do the necessary research. Go read Black anarchism. Go read anarcho-feminism. Go read indigenous anarchism. Go read, all of those. And if you do, you'll probably come out of it with a much better understanding. You'll probably stop stumbling over yourself in that sense. And I'm just assuming that you are. You may not even be. But after you do that, you'll probably also find you have more confidence in the things you're saying and you're just more informed. And so, you just won't sound like you're bumbling around a topic that's really important to those people. Because if you come and you start trying to make declarative statements about the experiences of the oppressed group to the oppressed group, and you don't know what you're talking about, they're just used to that. That's just this kind of like old, annoying behavior that they've experienced, and just comes off to them like overconfidence of the non-oppressed group. So just do the research. If you're talking to if you want to talk to Black people, go read Anarchism of the Black Revolution. Go read, Anarchy Can't Fight Alone. Go read A Soldier's Story by Kwasi Balagoon. Go read Kali Akuno. Go read, and so on with any other type of oppressed group you're interacting with. My university campus is flooded with Trotskyists and Marxists. Is it worth collaborating with them, or should the focus be on shifting the conversation to anarchism? The Trotskyists, there's probably not any way to cooperate with them. Unfortunately, Trotskyism is based around co-option, destruction, and infiltration. It's kind of just one of these really old tactics they just keep using. So probably they would try to sabotage anything you built together. Marxists, they're just varied. You have all kinds of Marxists. There are Marxists that are almost indiscernible from anarchists. And then there are Marxists who are authoritarians. So if they just call themselves Marxist and not say Marxist-Leninist or, Marxist-Leninist Maoist or something, then I don't know if I'd say you should just like default to cooperating with them, but it's probably at least worth your time to ask whether they are possible allies. So certain kinds of Marxists will be. People who just call themselves Marxist sometimes are allies. People who call themselves, for example, Marxist humanists, also generally going to be allies. Open Marxism, often allies. If they're decolonial, they're often more allies than you might think. If they're just like, they have a decolonial Marxism, you might find that they're like anti-colonial or post-colonial. They can be allies. But if you mean authoritarian Marxists, absolutely not. Yeah, no, those groups can't be cooperated with. Unfortunately, they'll just try to co-opt your group. They'll just try to absorb your group and deconvert all of the anarchists and so on. I think the focus would always be develop an specifically anarchist organization, and then begin doing popular education about anarchism, and try not to spend your time on like going in on those groups and criticizing them. All that's going to do is start big drama and fighting that's probably going to sap your energy. Focus instead on just arguing for anarchism. Create reading groups for anarchism. And try to spread anarchism. Go put up flyers about anarchism, spread zines, table zines out on campus, all that stuff. Margot says, I code as a cis guy, am white. I look like shit though, and am mentally ill. I perceive people treating me as less than, but question my perception. My experience talking politics with people has been very iffy, partially because I get overwhelmed, and I think partially because I somehow don't seem respectable or something to them. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the experience that I was saying that you may be coming up against. Unfortunately, since I don't have personal experience with that, I can't tell you exactly how to navigate that. What I would say is probably the most you could do, or rather, I don't want to say that, but one of the most important things you could do is just learn enough that you don't question yourself, that you don't get overwhelmed, such that you've heard all of their arguments and nothing's going to surprise you anymore. Because once you get to that, your adrenaline isn't going to spike when they say something. You're not going to feel afraid and, disarmed. They're not going to bring up something you haven't heard. If you're 5 steps ahead of them, there's a chance they're never even going to catch up. So that's my recommendation. And unfortunately, I got to say, insofar as that comes to debate or argument, it's just this painful process of doing it over and over and over, even if it kind of hurts, because it's probably going to hurt. You're going to fuck it up numerous times before you get good at it. So you got to kind of do it, even though it'll be painful, and sometimes you'll screw it up and look really wrong. But the more education you have, the more confident you'll be entering those discussions. Do you think the socialist adjacent projects in the West, as the Preston model and the Cleveland model? I don't know what those are, so I can't weigh in on those. I've been asking Nick from RBN to interview you. He's anarchist. Sure, I'd be down for that. I'm pretty open to just doing podcasts and interviews and stuff. I wouldn't go on an authoritarian podcast probably, but I guess it depends. Maybe I would. How to support the Ukrainian people without looking like you support NATO? I mean, authoritarians are just going to say you support NATO no matter what if you don't support Russia imperializing Ukraine. If you don't support Russia being imperialist, you support NATO by their conception. So there's no real avoiding that for these authoritarian stands. But I mean, insofar as like, what is the best way to present your arguments? Like, just emphasize you support the Ukrainian people, not the Ukrainian state. Do not defend the Ukrainian state. You shouldn't defend the Ukrainian state. Fuck the Ukrainian state. Fuck the Ukrainian state. Fuck the Russian state. You should only support the Ukrainian and Russian people. And you should always emphasize that. emphasize you support the people's right to self-defense, but you do not support the Ukrainian state. It's just the mechanism through which people are, that the defense is taking place. But absolutely do not defend the Ukrainian military. Do not defend, Azov battalion and all that. No reason to. Those are all atrocious. When I talk about anarchism, I tend to sound like some sort of raging conspiracy theorist lunatic when I talk about how horrible the established order is. How can I avoid sounding like that? Well, I mean, I guess it depends on where you are. Where I'm at, it's pretty hard to come off like a lunatic if you think everything's falling apart. Most people will just agree with you. But I think that probably what you should be focusing on is presenting arguments that are just ironclad arguments, trying to really focus on how things are falling apart, focus on specifics, really hone in on the details of what's going wrong instead of being broad. The more broad you are, the more that you're going to sound like, kind of raving lunatic. Unless, as I've found, you're very articulate. Like often I'll just say things as broad as like, well, I think hierarchical power structures just lead to, the death of societies and the destruction of the ecology. So, just casually lay that one out there. And then they have to interact with that. They have to try to disprove that. It's going to be very, very challenging. But, first thing you might just try to do is like help people understand that the electoral system is completely broken. Regulations are completely broken, focusing around things which are just verifiably screwed up. If you're in the United States, the Electoral College, tell them about the Electoral College, learn about the 2008 financial crisis, just for liberals, those details, that's everything for them. Ooh, you sound so official. Oh, you can recall years and the names of acts. Wow. You must be so smart. Like that respectability politics stuff is just like candy for them. As far as, conservatives, they tend to just kind of think things are already fucked up. They just think that all the wrong things are fucked up, So, Cleveland and Preston models are essential municipal socialist projects. The Preston model and Cleveland model. Oh, you just repeated yourself. Do you have any opinions about the Stranza commune? I don't know what that is. Anarchy is dismissed as not viable. We need more to understand how power works. Yeah. In order for anarchy to be understood as viable, people need more than to think this system sucks. They need to be told how problems could be dealt with in an alternative system. They already know this system sucks, but most people just think it's the best we've got. It's like that old Winston Churchill quote or whatever, democracy is the worst system ever devised except for all others that have been tried. I think that's what the quote is. But, they're just kind of like, yeah, well, it does suck, but there's no better alternative. There is no alternative, as Margaret Thatcher said. So people can't just be convinced the system sucks and then they'll be like, cool, I'm an anarchist now. You have to convince them anarchism can meaningfully address problems and that it has actual analysis that makes them understand how power works around them. So we'll say my voice is starting to get kind of strained here. I can feel my throat tightening up. So I think I'm probably about to end. So I'll stick around a little bit longer, but we are coming around now to the end of the stream. If anybody's got any final thoughts, questions, ideas, and so on. Would also like to emphasize that if you like these live streams, go become a patron at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/anarch, ANARK. If I can make enough to fully support myself on the channel, I will probably commit to doing one of these live streams a month, and or maybe every other month or something. So, every time I do one of these Q&As, people have always got super interesting questions. I actually really enjoy doing these. I find them easy because I can just ramble forever, as anybody can tell from my content. Also, I guess I never mention it, but like on YouTube, you can also like join, you can become like a patron on YouTube. Like you click the little join button down by the Anarch logo. If there's some reason you're watching this and you're not subscribed to the channel, you should probably subscribe to the channel. If you're watching it right now, you should probably click like. That'd be cool. Yeah. There's super chats. Show your support for Anarch. Yeah, I don't know. No super chats for old Anarch. But, yeah. Any last questions? Anyone? I suppose not. Well, it was good seeing y'all. And I haven't decided whether I am going to do an Anarch Abridged this week. This may be the stand-in for Anarch Abridged this week. But regardless, I will definitely do one next week. That's it, though. That's everything. I can't think of anything else to say. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you all. And let's see here. I feel this is around the community. Thanks for participating. Cool. Good last stuff here. But that's it. I'll see y'all soon.